Today we dive into the lore of Dagoth Ur, the immortal dreamer whose heartbeat beneath Red Mountain almost rewrote the fate of Tamriel. We'll follow his rise from Voryn Dagoth, trusted ally of Nerevar, to the ash-wreathed god who forged a colossal brass titan and unleashed the Blight. Along the way, uncover how a single stolen heart shattered gods, reshaped a people, and still echoes in the silent craters of Morrowind. Now let us begin. In the earliest hours of the Dawn era, amid the shifting fog that lay between myth and memory, the Velothi people, future Chima, later Dwemer, wandered the coasts and valleys of what would one day be called Risdain. They lived in clan bands that traced descent to different aspects of the ancestor spirit Veloth, and carried with them a restlessness for the brass-lit horizons of prophecy. Among these clans, the one that kept closest to the rugged northern volcanic marches was a modest branch that would later style itself House Dagoth. In those days, they possessed no council seats, no sprawling strongholds of ebony and glass, only a guarded pride in tending the fumarole-scarred slopes of the mountain they named Veloth's Shadow, a lesser cousin to the great volcano that dominated the central plateau. Their lives revolved around hunting ash-tinged, harvesting the bitter nectar of Scathacraw, and reciting ancestral maxims beside cinder-ringed campfires. Yet even then, they already spoke in hushed tones of a deeper fire beneath the land, a pulse older than the moons or the falling of the stars. They sensed rather than knew that something alive moved far below. The early Velothi faith was not yet rigid. Worship of the good Daedra, Bothiah, Mephala, and Azura mingled with tribal hero cult and pragmatic reverence for local earthbound spirits. In House Dagoth's memory archives, preserved first on chitin tablets and later as dissident songs, the mountain spirits took precedence. They believed each vent and caldera to be the half-buried skull of a titan slain during creation, its thought and heat leaking upward in dreamlike seepage. When distant seers spoke of Lorkhan's heart being cast across Nirn, the Dagoth storytellers wondered if that heart had not landed in their own back garden. This question would become the quiet drumbeat beneath every later choice, as curiosity hardened into certainty and certainty into obsession. During the late Dawn and early Merethic, Velothi clans drifted together into larger groupings that resembled the proto-great houses. They met to barter glass daggers, share star charts, and negotiate boundaries around the rare water-bearing oases between the ash wastes. A young Mer named Voryn, scion of the Dagoth bloodline, emerged in these gatherings as a voice both measured and unyielding. He was described in surviving fleet script as tall for his people, gaunt, and possessed of eyes that glimmered ember red even before the first touch of corpus or divine spark. Voryn carried the ancestral dagger Keening sibling, forged from raw obsidian by some lost shield ancestor, and he used it not in battle, but in ritual to probe the memory of stones, carving slow spirals through which he claimed the land whispered back. With each pilgrimage he undertook, Voryn's reputation as a lawkeeper spread. Yet unlike other rising clan figures, Olmelixia of the Indoral, Sotha Sil of the Set followers, Voryn's stature rested less on grand feats and more on his relentless attention to subtle tremors underfoot. It was Voryn who first codified the ancestral dream of House Dagoth into a doctrine they called the Seventh Sign, a prophecy that 7 thunders would one day peel open the sky above Red Mountain and reveal a divine engine at its heart. He wrote that every ember spark, every shifting gust of ash, and every tremor in the deep crust pointed toward an unspoken covenant between Nirn's mortal frame and a sleeping principle of power. Whether he discovered the myth in trance or crafted it to suit political ends remains unknowable. What is certain is that the seventh sign unified his people in a fierce patience, a willingness to wait centuries for the mountain's hidden rebirth. Beyond Dagoth camps, the world of Risdain was restless. Dwemer city-states flourished in metallic sublimity, their subterranean halls ringing with tonal mirages produced by clangor chimes and liquid light. Chima caravans carried embroidered memory scrolls through Dwemer tunnels despite mutual suspicion. The gap between the two cultures was widest in questions of faith. Dwemer scorned the Daedra and any concept of immortal spirit, instead venerating reason given form through mathematics and tonal architecture. Chima saw in ancestral reverence a living reciprocity, each soul a link in an unbroken chain to primeval ancestors. Voryn Dagoth walked a narrow bridge between these worldviews. He respected Dwemer craft, even learning rudimentary tonal calculus under the tutelage of a brass-robed monitor in En-Chardak. Yet he never wavered in his conviction that unseen spirits preceded and would outlast any machine. During one fateful era known to later scholars as the time of spiraling strife, tremors beneath Red Mountain intensified. Dust storms rolled over central Risdane for months, dimming the sun to a tarnished coin at noon. Tales of Dwemer, prospectors vanishing near funeral pits, circulated through caravan gossip nets. Some claimed smugglers glimpsed crimson light flickering inside collapsed lava tubes. Voryn Dagoth spearheaded joint expeditions with his ally Nerevar of House Indoral, then little more than an upstart war leader, to investigate. Surviving field journals, preserved on scorch-resistant rolls of resin-backed silk, describe narrow tunnels glazed with green volcanic glass and chambers where corundum veins pulsed faintly like arteries. Instruments of Dwemer make registered perplexing resonant signatures, neither seismic nor magnetic, echoing at harmonic intervals that suggested, to educated ears, a tonal algorithm of enormous scale. Though no expedition reached the source, Voryn returned convinced that beneath Red Mountain slept not only a heart, but an entire mythic engine awaiting the correct note to awaken. The forging of alliances followed these discoveries. Voryn saw in Nerevar a leader capable of welding the disparate Chima tribes into a cohesive nation. Likewise, Nerevar recognized Dagoth's insight and intuition regarding whatever dwelt under the mountain. Their bond was sealed in an oath ritual upon the windswept steps of Kogorun, an ancient stronghold newly claimed by House Dagoth. They cut twin sigils into basalt, mixed their blood, and declared that any fate touching Red Mountain would touch them both. Songs of this pact still echo in the ruined ritual halls where flame atronachs now drift like lost memories. Under Voryn's guidance, House Dagoth shifted from insular volcan tenders to crucial stewards of northern borderlands. They built way shrines along ash-blasted passes, offering shelter to pilgrims bound for Prophet Veloth's old path. They minted token coins out of glass sediment, stamped with the stylized outline of Red Mountain crowned by 7 stars. These coins found favor among traders for their stark beauty and resilience to heat. Each bore on its rim a short verse, "In 7 time, the heart remembers." Passers-by puzzled over the cryptic motto, unaware they were carrying parts of Voryn's prophecy in their pockets. Culturally, House Dagoth refined unique rites around dream interpretation. Dream watchers kept sleep diaries for every child from birth, charting recurring symbols against lunar phases and ashfall density. If a sleeper dreamed of a bleeding stone or a thunder without clouds, scribes marked that lineage as heart-touched and granted them roles in temple observances. Over generations, such practices created a collective memory saturated with Red Mountain's imagery. Scholars from Olmelixia's court visiting in later centuries remarked that even the youngest Dagoth child recited geological data about magma chamber resonances the way other clans recited harvest prayers. The metaphysical underpinning for this obsession with dreams drew from an older Chima concept known as the Earthbone Canticle, a belief that Nirn's physical laws sang a low continuous hymn decipherable by those with patience. Dwemer tonal architects approached the canticle mathematically, while Dagoth mystics preferred intuitive resonance, chanting vowel tones in caverns until stalactites wept mineral tears. In these vigils, Voryn claimed to hear words formed of pressure itself. Transcriptions etched by his hand contain phrases like "stone cannot forget when thought becomes weight," and "the wound within the world still bleeds iron fire." Later philologists argued these are poetic metaphors, yet for Dagoth cultists, they remained literal. Political winds shifted again when Dwemer tensions flared into open hostility over competing territorial claims and philosophical derisions. Skirmishes dotted the border ridges. Nerevar and Voryn sought to maintain uneasy diplomacy, but events accelerated beyond their control with the revelation that Dwemer Lord High Craft Priest Kagrenak planned to harness Lorkhan's heart through the Kagrenak tools, constructing a new god machine known, in fragmentary notes, as Numidium. House Dagoth's earlier wonder at mountain secrets became alarm when spy reports indicated Dwemer drilling near core vents dangerously close to the rumored heart chamber. Voryn convened a crisis council at his familial citadel of Enduzil, summoning representatives from Indoral, Redoran, Drez, and Telvanni. There he argued that the Dwemer pursuit of divine ascension by mechanical means threatened the quintessence of Chima identity, a direct affront to the Daedra and ancestors alike. The council minutes preserve Voryn's speech in firm strokes. The thoughtless engine they raise shall crush souls to stoke its brass veins. We must not suffer our forefathers' echo to be broken. Some delegates wished immediate war, others urged prolonged negotiation. Voryn counseled measured force, seize the heart before Kagrenak could bind it, study its nature, and decide the manner of its stewardship. To this end, he and Nerevar formed the First Council Alliance, a coalition aiming to unify Chima houses and challenge Dwemer hegemony. While Nerevar handled the broader statesmanship, Voryn oversaw intelligence and deployment along the mountain approaches, placing Dagoth scouts in positions to monitor Dwemer excavation. Amid preparations, Voryn spent increasingly long hours within caverns below Kogorun, conducting solitary communion sessions. His private journals from those days, recovered centuries later by buoyant armigers, reveal vivid waking dreams wherein he walked a vascular labyrinth pulsating with molten light. At its center, he met a presence neither Daedric nor Edric, described only as the tremor that remembers. This presence offered no words, but impressed upon him a sense of vast sorrow and possibility, like the moment before breath turns into speech. Voryn interpreted these visions as a calling to act as guardian of the heart, protector against all who would misuse or misunderstand it. This guardian role would become the seed of his later transformation. As crises deepened, House Dagoth warriors distinguished themselves in skirmishes along the Fjorda Mimir and the slopes of Ardrun, employing ash-made cloak tactics, throwing up blinding cinder clouds to mask sudden strikes. Their ashglass armor, fired in subterranean kilns that followed ancestral proportions of heat and prayer, proved light yet resilient against Dwemer bolt projectors. Throughout these conflicts, Dagoth forces adhered to a strict code that forbade wanton desecration of the land. Every fallen tree was replanted in sapling form. Every disturbed lava crust was sealed with resin chalk sigils. They believed Red Mountain watched and judged. Meanwhile, Nerevar secured treaties among reluctant houses, promising equitable influence in a post-war order. The Indoral scholar Vivek, later of divine triune fame, joined the alliance as both poet, prophet, and strategist. Meetings between Vivek and Voryn made for an interesting pairing. Where Voryn spoke in clipped geomantic references, Vivek spun allegories of river marriages and sword-singing stars. Yet they shared an underlying fascination with how mortal intention could rewrite cosmic possibility. Both studied Kagrenak's theories, though from different angles, and came to view Dwemer ambition as a mirror in which Chima destiny must recognize itself. The year that Risdane historians call the Great Conjunction saw omens cascade. Twin moons Massa and Secunda eclipsed the sun in weird tandem, casting the land into crimson dusk. Herds of guars refused to breed. Water in pilgrimage wells tasted faintly of copper. Dwemer envoys, once talkative, grew silent behind sealed citadels. It was then that Voryn proposed a final covert mission to verify how close Kagrenak had come to awakening Numidium. He led a small team through collapsed lava tubes lined with Dwemer mining markers. They emerged into a cathedral-sized cavity where the heart itself hovered within a matrix of tonal beams, an avenue of light lattice singing a chord that vibrated marrow. Witness reports agree on that much. What happened next divides scholars. Some say Voryn attempted to disrupt Kagrenak's calculus and was wounded by resonant feedback that scorched his skin ash-gray. Others claim the heart recognized him, imprinting a fragment of its power upon his flesh. Voryn's own later testimonies, gleaned through dream conversations with cult devotees, suggest he simply listened and learned, leaving the chamber unharmed in body, yet changed in comprehension. He returned to Nerevar bearing grave news. The Dwemer were on the verge of achieving transubstantiation. War was no longer a matter of pride, but survival. Thus the stage was set for the War of the First Council and the climactic Battle of Red Mountain. Yet before armies marched, House Dagoth experienced a profound internal reorganization. Voryn gathered the heart-touched dreamers, those marked by prophetic sleep, and formed an inner circle called the Keepers of the Seventh Sign. He revealed to them fragmentary diagrams of the heart's lattice and taught quiet breathing patterns that matched its pulse. The Keepers committed to absolute secrecy and prepared ritual chambers beneath Cogorun, where they inscribed spiraling sigils designed to resonate with mountain tremors. Their goal, so Voryn revealed, was not merely to defeat the Dwemer, but to claim rightful custodianship of whatever divine furnace lay beneath. Only thus could they fulfill Veloth's Exodus dream of Myr ascending beyond mundane constraints. At this juncture, Voryn's motives began to appear ambiguous even to allies. Alandro Sul, Nerevar's shield thane, later wrote that he sensed a burning zeal in the Dagoth Lord's gaze, as though a lantern had been lit behind his eyes and could not be dimmed. Nerevar himself counseled prudence, reminding Voryn that any divine engine was as dangerous to its bearer as to its foes. Voryn agreed outwardly, yet pursued his preparations with undiminished intensity. He ordered the forging of ceremonial masks, bronze visors that echoed Dwemer facial geometry but bore Chimera runic edging. Each keeper's mask symbolized the meeting of faith and machine, a merging Voryn believed necessary to guard against Dwemer sorcery. Then came the night of the hurling disc, an omen recorded in Ashlander oral tradition, when a star fell upon Red Mountain's flank and shattered into 7 shards. House Dagoth elders interpreted the event as the first of the prophesied 7 thunders. Fires raged for days, painting the sky a lurid orange even as far south as Necrom. While other houses scrambled to protect settlements, Dagoth priests convened dawn vigils to thank the mountain for revealing its anger. Witnesses claimed they saw Voryn standing alone upon a ridge, arms raised into ashfall like a branchless tree petitioning the sky. Yet despite these portents, life for ordinary Dagoth citizens continued along measured patterns. Farmers tended sultrous terraces carved into cooled lava flows, using pitchers of mineral-rich meltwater to coax spindly shoots from barren ground. Artisan enclaves near Caldera smelted ebony flecks into somber jewelry, each piece stamped with the clan's sigil, a flattened mountain crowned by a single eye. Young scribes practiced glyph carving along basalt hallways, their chisels tapping rhythms reminiscent of seismic patterns. These everyday details matter because they reveal a society not dominated by militant fervor alone, but sustained by devotion to place, to the mountain's slow breath. As the Merethic era waned, so too did the illusions of isolation. Word of imperial expansions in distant lands, of Alessian doctrines rising from the heartland, hinted that the world beyond Risdane would soon press inward. Voryn's writings show concern that foreign powers, ignorant of mountain sanctity, might meddle in its hidden fire for their own engines. This fear likely accelerated his resolve, for he notes that time quickens, yet stone remains, therefore we must choose for stone before foreign song distorts its rhythm. In other words, House Dagoth would act before outer echoes reached their sacred core. The chapter in House Dagoth Annals that chronicles the eve of open conflict closes with an image of Voryn Dagoth descending alone into the deepest vault under Cogorun. There he seated himself upon a rough-hewn throne of obsidian, breathing in the humid heat rising from cracks that led, legend said, all the way to the mountain's wounded heart. He recorded a single line before sealing the stone diary. "I have listened, and the heart listens in return. Soon our songs will meet." Outside, the banners of Chimera Alliance gathered, crimson and gold fluttering under a bruised sky, while Dwemer citadels sealed their gates and prepared trembling tonal resonators. The mountain itself waited, miles high and silent, its smoke plumes flattened by rising winds. Thus ends the first long movement in the saga of Dagoth Ur, the patient cultivation of a clan's purpose, the shaping of Voryn Dagoth by prophecy, and the first faint murmur of a buried power that would one day reshape gods and mortals alike. The story now advances toward war, betrayal, and the forging of legend upon ash-stained stone, but those moments remain beyond the present horizon, awaiting the tread of armies and the cry of unbound stars. The mountain kept its hush, but the land below stirred with the slow resolve of countless feet preparing for war. Lines of ash-bannered columns traced the ridges from Aldrune down through the Fyadas, their silhouettes hazed by drifting cinder that clung to chitin cuirasses and ebony pauldrons alike. Where the last chapter closed upon Voryn Dagoth's solitary communion, the present hour opens upon the wider tide of preparation, a chorus of smiths, scribes, and strategists whose labors would define the coming storm. In the stronghold of Cogorun, once a fortress of modest scale, scaffolds now enwrapped every tower as masons fitted new parapets of fused glass stone. The keep's central hall echoed with the measured strike of hammers forging mask helms for the inner circle, each visage wrought to mirror the straight-line severity of Dwemer facial geometry while retaining chimeric flourishes engraved along the brow. Voryn Dagoth stood at the heart of this clamor, issuing instructions in an even voice that belied the urgency of his designs. He spoke seldom of outright conquest. Instead, he stressed stewardship, over power hidden, over an obligation owed to the ancestors, and over the fragile continuity of Chima destiny. Those who served him believed that by guarding Red Mountain, they guarded the past and future simultaneously, two wings of the same ash hawk beating against encroaching night. Beyond Cogorun, Lord Nerevar convened sessions of the nascent First Council in the marble-lined audience chamber of the Indoral Citadel at Mournhold. Representatives of the five great houses, Indoral, Redoran, Dres, Telvanni, and Dagoth, sat upon semicircular benches carved of petrified fungus. At Nerevar's right hand rested Vivek, whose almond-shaped eyes carried both curiosity and unspoken speculation. At his left stood Alandro Sol, the shield thane whose steady gaze measured the room's every tension. When Voryn entered, bearing the ash scent of the northern marches, the murmurs subsided. He bowed in the restrained, angular gesture of his clan, then unfurled parchment maps inked with Dwemer tunnel networks discovered by his scouts. The maps revealed a spiderwork of shafts burrowing like roots toward the mountain's heart. Bright red blotches marked loci where tonal resonators had been installed within arm's reach of magma conduits. Quiet spread as those present glimpsed the scale of Dwemer ambition. Discussion turned to strategy. Redoran voices urged an immediate strike upon all Dwemer city-states to prevent completion of Numidium. Dres delegates counseled attrition, cut trade routes, seize food stores, starve the foe. Telvanni archmagisters proposed a sorcerous quarantine, conjuring vast spectral wards to seal off the mountain entirely. Through it all, Voryn maintained a steady tenor. He argued that the Chima could neither destroy the Dwemer artifact outright, for lack of understanding, nor allow its activation. Instead, the heart's custodianship must fall to those willing to treat with its divine autonomy, his own house foremost among them. Some bristled at what they perceived as ambition shrouded in piety. Yet Nerevar, mindful of their long friendship and of Voryn's intimate knowledge of subterranean passages, granted him command over reconnaissance and containment operations in the mountain's shadow. As these councils progressed, the Dwemer realm of Vivardenfell moved with equal purpose. Deep below the copperlit corridors of Bamzamshend, High Craft Priest Kagrenak convened tonal engineers, each cloaked in dust-stained robes and bearing resonance, forks the size of spears. They labored to calibrate the three tools: Sunder, a great hammer capable of shattering magical bonds; Keening, a needle-pointed dagger designed to refine cosmic filaments; and Wraithguard, a gauntlet to render its bearer immune to the heart's lethal pulse. Rhythms of struck metal reverberated through arcane circuitry etched into every column. Where the Chima prayed, the Dwemer calculated, each algorithm another chant in their hymn to reason. In machine language, they wrote of a new god forged not of flesh or faith, but of axiom and oscillation. Yet even amid cold calculus, doubt whispered. Some Dwemer scholars recorded in brass-plate diaries that the heart's feedback raised unresolvable equations, hints of consciousness defying logical proof. Others feared that the tonal lattice, once activated, would propagate harmonic stress through the crust and tear Nirn's seams. Kagrenak dismissed such fears, citing data traces where error margins converged on acceptable thresholds. Confidence hardened to arrogance, as it often does when great power lies just beyond the reach of caution. Back within Chima territories, Vivek began to compose sequences of verse intended not for public recitation, but for metaphysical anchoring, word walls of thought. He called them, designed to stabilize collective morale. He recited to Voryn passages, comparing the impending clash to the interplay of twin rivers converging at a waterfall. Voryn, rooted in earth and stone rather than fluid metaphor, responded with seismic metrics, illustrating how a controlled eruption at selected vents could divert Dwemer tunnel advance. Their exchanges, though dissimilar in vocabulary, revealed a shared understanding that on some level language itself, poetic or mathematical, would shape the fate of gods. Preparations filtered down to ordinary folk. In the ash fields around Aldrune, craftsmen coated guar-skin water sacks with resin so they would not dry out during troop movements. Mothers stitched charms of hackalow leaf and rubrush into their children's collars, tokens against Dwemer gas emanations rumored to cause delirium. Pilgrims bound for shrines of Azura lit additional lamps asking the goddess to preserve the Chima soul should Dwemer heresy unseat its place in the star-appointed order. Among House Dagoth villages, an old lullaby gained new resonance. Children hummed, "Sleep, little ashen child, the mountain keeps your name wake when the seventh thunder calls and all the earth's aflame." What once calmed restless nights now foreshadowed days of looming battle. Nerevar's diplomatic circuit expanded. He rode guar-mounted through the mushroom forests of Tel Branora to secure major corridors that would transport supplies by levitation. He negotiated with Drez Soltrice magnates for grain shipments to sustain armies during a siege. Each deal rested upon the promise that after victory, the Chima houses would reform governance to grant equitable influence. Such assurances placated political fears but raised new uncertainties. If the Dwemer were defeated, who would hold the heart? On this question, many eyes cast subtle glances toward Voryn Dagoth. Sotha Sil, whose artificer mind paralleled Dwemer genius yet retained mystical humility, visited Kogorun under moonless skies. He and Voryn descended into a gallery where basalt pillars pulsed faintly, synced to heartbeats both literal and imagined. Their Sotha Sil examined resonance diagrams etched along the walls in chalk. "You hear the mountain," he observed, his voice quiet as trickling coolant. Voryn inclined his head. "It speaks in frequencies older than shape," he replied. Sil traced a spiral with one silver-gloved finger. "Be certain that what you hear is not merely echo." Voryn answered with silence that implied both acknowledgement and immutable resolve. Amid these personal dialogues, spies traveled. An Indoral courier grasped a brass cylinder bearing stolen Dwemer schematics, only to vanish along the Fjada trail before reaching Vivek's study. Ridoran outriders found her body weeks later, desiccated by ash and clawed by unidentified predators. The cylinder had been opened and emptied. That loss spurred Nerevar to authorize covert raids on Dwemer caravan lines, hoping to capture additional intelligence. Time, once slow as cooled lava, now seemed quickened by invisible bellows. The first open engagement erupted not at the heart of mountains, but on the coastal shelf near Nisses, where a Dwemer outpost tested a new steam-powered obelisk projecting sonic pulses across river valleys. House Ridoran forces, guided by Dagoth scouts, swept in after dusk. Ash cloaks billowed around Chiton Mail as they crossed metallic sands scraped clean by Dwemer dredgers. Bolts of condensed sound cracked the night air, causing Ridoran shields to vibrate so fiercely that teeth rattled loose in their gums. Yet Dagoth saboteurs, crawling through vent shafts, tamped resin charges deep within the obelisk's anchor. At dawn, the structure collapsed inward like a folding hand, its own resonant energy imploding upon itself. Word of the victory spread, and morale surged among Chima ranks. But so too did Dwemer resolve, for every failure is merely a data point in a larger iteration. Kagrenak responded by accelerating excavation schedules. Thousands of automata, sphere centurions and spider workers, poured into fume-choked tunnels, their brass limbs clacking in unison. They drilled shaft after shaft toward the heart's chamber, guided by harmonic markers that pulsed at exact intervals. Dagoth spies reported rooms lined with sleeping caskets, each containing a Dwemer volunteer prepared to merge with Numidium once operational. This revelation chilled even the most battle-hardened commanders, for it suggested a willingness among Dwemer to relinquish individual identity for the sake of collective ascension. Meanwhile, Voryn revisited his clan's dream archives to refine the resonance chants used by the keepers of the seventh sign. Over nights lit by sour green fungi, they practiced synchronized breathing matched to subterranean tremors. They drank infusions steeped from ash yams, saltris, and a drop of their own blood, believing the blend attuned body humors to volcanic hum. Some volunteers emerged from trance exhibiting skin mottled by faint vermilion lesions, precursors, perhaps, to the later corpus affliction, but they spoke of profound unity with the deep pulse. Voryn neither encouraged nor forbade this transformation, observing with the detachment of an archivist studying the unfolding of a script long foretold. As months rolled into years, the borders between war preparation and war itself blurred. Skirmishes erupted across every corridor of Vivardenfell, yet one event in particular twisted the political knot beyond casual unraveling: the scandal of the Thorana letters. Archmagister Dagoth Ur of House Telvanni, known for eccentric brilliance, was discovered to have corresponded clandestinely with a Dwemer tonal engineer. Fragments of the letters, captured by Dagoth courier intercepts, hinted at a shared plan to study heart harmonics for mutual gain after the conflict. When these fragments reached the council floor, accusations flew. Telvanni lords protested entrapment, Redoran generals demanded immediate censure. Voryn remained outwardly calm, but privately tightened spy networks to monitor every house for potential collusion. The scandal forced Nerevar's hand. He declared a provisional war council composed solely of commanders trusted beyond doubt: himself, Vivek, Olmelixia, Sotha Sil, Alandro Sul, and Voryn Dagoth. This inner circle met beneath ghost lantern glow in a stone crypt beneath Mournhold, so old it still bore Dwemer-carved numerals from an age when races coexisted without open hostility. Their purpose was clear: map a decisive campaign to seize Red Mountain before Kagrenak completed the ritual. Each brought unique insight. Vivek offered tactical narratives shaped by mythic metaphors, Olmelixia invoked the blessings of the three good Daedra, Sotha Sil supplied mechanical understanding of Dwemer devices, Alandro Sul contributed pragmatic field intelligence, Nerevar balanced them all with leadership tempered by empathy, and Voryn delivered the mountain's own murmured warnings. Together they produced the Plan of Seven Shadows, a campaign of converging spearheads timed to the phases of Massa. Redoran cohorts would press from the west to draw Dwemer forces outward. Indoral and Dres legions, bolstered by tribunal-blessed ordinators, would hold the southern passes. Telvanni sorcerers, chastened and newly loyal, would weave atmospheric glamours to obscure army movements beneath swirling ash clouds. House Dagoth detachments, familiar with every fumarole, would infiltrate through vent networks to strike at critical tuning pillars. The plan hinged upon coordinated timing. If any house faltered, the Dwemer could reinforce valves and seal the mountain's heart forever behind stratified walls of adamant glass. Our grand strategies crystallized, individual stories unfolded in quieter chambers. In a modest barracks outside Kogorun, a young warrior named Dagoth Odrose cleaned corrosion from his ash-glass blade. He whispered to the weapon every night, promising it the taste of metal-tinned Dwemer oil once battle began. Not far away, a healer from House Dres mixed ointments of marshmallow pulp and scrib jelly, uncertain whether such salves could mend wounds inflicted by steam breathers, but determined to try. Their lives, scarcely recorded in official annals, mattered all the same, for wars are woven of innumerable unnamed threads. On the last eve before the armies moved, an omen crossed the velvet sky. A meteor, tail bright as molten silver, arced above Red Mountain and vanished behind its silhouette. In Dagoth belief, this signified the second thunder, the mountain announcing that alignment of forces neared its caudal climax. Azura's priestesses interpreted the meteor differently, a tear shed for fate about to be broken. Yet among commanders, there was no time for augury. Orders were signed with wax seals stamped by Nerevar's ring. Messengers mounted dusk striders and galloped into gloom, carrying scroll tubes bound with netch leather. Every campfire along the ashlands flickered brighter as final instructions were read aloud by torchlight. The day of marching began under crimson dawn. Columns of indoral pikes glinted through dust haze, each spear tip dragging a thin contrail of ruddy light as sunbeams refracted on waxed ebony. Redoran foragers cleared paths through thorned saltris, layering walkways with shredded fungal bark to buffer supply wagons. Telvanni mages, perched atop levitating platforms, maintained swirling ash veil illusions overhead, shaping them into serpentine formations that drifted eastward to mislead Dwemer sentries. Above all hovered the mountain, its crown shrouded in vaporous plumes that pulsed with hints of inner fire. Dwemer watchers noticed nonetheless. From ramparts of Veminal and Endusel, they released aerial drones, small brass spheres emitting high-frequency whistles to chart chimer maneuvers. They doubled guard shifts at the east and west Fayada choke points, readied Centurion spheres in nested ranks, and calibrated scuttling spider turrets along ridge lines. Reports filed to Kagranak documented patterns consistent with coordinated assault. He responded by scheduling the final resonance test of the Heart's lattice at sunrise 2 days hence, confident that by then no mortal army could intervene. One final council gathered in a cavern hall beneath Kogorun, lit only by the red glow of Igni's crystals embedded in walls. Nerevar spoke first, laying out fallback lines and contingency flares. Vivek recited a brief stanza intended to steady the spirit. Hold not fear in an iron cup, lest it poison your own reflection. Olmelixia offered blessings, each word slow and resonant like bell tones. Sotha Sil demonstrated a device of folded sigillite plates that could disrupt Dwemer clockwork for 10 breaths, a precious window for sabotage. Alandro Sol reviewed scout dispatches pinpointing newly installed sonic mortars along ridge spines. Then Voryn addressed the room. His voice was low enough that one had to lean in to hear, yet each syllable carried weight. The heart is nearer waking than any of us, he said. Should Kagranak strike his final chord, the world may tremble in ways none can predict. If we reach the chamber first, we must not act in haste. We must listen, as one listens for the moment a vein in stone completes its song. If it chooses us, we will guide its fire. If it resists, we must stand guard until it can be understood. Let this be our charge, not merely to win a war, but to shield the future from rash invention. None contradicted him, though later accounts suggest some among them, perhaps Vivek, perhaps even Nerevar, felt a ripple of unease at the certainty in those words. Marches commenced. Day blurred into day as ash skis vacillated between copper dawns and bruised twilights. Dagoth infiltrators crawled through vent shafts so narrow that chitin plates scraped stone. They planted directional charges along tuning pillars, timed to detonate at the exact instant Redoran drums signaled main assault. Indoral cohorts advanced in phalanx across the Fayada Belia, shields interlocking against bursts of pressurized steam from Dwemer trenches. Telvanni spells sculpted spirals of static that short-circuited first-line automata, their brass husks collapsing like puppets with severed strings. In the midst of chaos, Voryn moved unseen. He donned a mask helm forged for him alone, its face a smooth plane of dark glass reflecting the red glow of lava flows. Beside him strode 2 of the keepers, both bearing staff blades inscribed with the 7-pointed sigil. They slipped through a tunnel mouth previously scouted weeks before, descending by rope into a fissure so hot that droplets of sweat sizzled upon the stone. At each junction, they consulted vibration notes etched onto bone chips, confirming that the path's frequency matched the heart chamber's outer harmonics. Somewhere far overhead, battles roared like distant thunderclaps, yet here only the slow breathing of earth spoke. Meanwhile, high upon the slopes above, Nerevar led the central thrust. His armor, bedecked with indoral heraldry, shone faintly despite ash grime. He carried the Moon and Star Ring, artifact of Azura, whose blue gem pulsed each time a Dwemer shockwave tremored the ground. Alandro's soul guarded his flank, slashing Dwemer constructs with an ebony glaive, sparks flying like constellations torn from metal sky. Vivek darted through gaps in lines, poem spells coalescing into tangible wards that deflected sonic lances. Olmelixia directed healers, chanting mantras that coaxed fractured bones back into alignment. Sotha Sil, unseen, manipulated mechanical sigils embedded upon his gauntlets, causing Dwemer artillery to malfunction at crucial moments. The Dwemer defense was ferocious. Cylindrical turrets rotated on concealed tracks, firing spheres that detonated into webs of force. Steam golems hurled plates of molten brass that stuck to shields and burned through them in seconds. For every automaton felled, another emerged from an underground hatch, its body still bearing stamping marks of fresh assembly, yet chimer momentum endured. Battle songs, a low monotone chant learned from House Dagoth, rippled across indoral ranks, sinking heartbeats to footfalls, forging many into one. Deep underground, Voryn reached the antechamber preceding the Heart's vault. His small contingent halted before a bronze gate inscribed with Dwemer runes that pulsed as though alive. He lifted Keening's sibling, the obsidian dagger of his house, and touched its tip to the gate. A shiver passed through metal, runes flickered, then dimmed. Likely Kagranak believed only his own gauntlet could bypass security, yet Voryn's knowledge of resonance allowed him to mimic the required signature with a single harmonic note whispered across the blade. The gate splintered open with a sigh of escaping steam. Beyond, the Heart's glow suffused the cavern, an eerie crimson sphere suspended above a lattice of interlocking rings. Each ring vibrated at a distinct pitch, their combined chord painting striations of light upon basalt walls. In that radiance, Dwemer engineers worked frenetically, some tightening bolts on resonance rods, others calibrating monitoring strata. They scarcely registered the intruders before the first keeper sliced through a power conduit, bathing the chamber in crackling blue sparks. Alarms flared, yet Voryn stepped forward undeterred. The Heart pulsed once, and the cavern shook as if in greeting. Above ground, Kagranak felt the tremor via remote sensors fed to a wrist-bound device. He understood at once, Chimer forces had breached the sanctum prematurely. Instead of recalling troops, he declared commencement of the final activation. Dwemer horns sounded a new tone, lower, carrying dread. Automata across all battlegrounds paused, then redirected toward interior defense. Nerevar, noticing the shift, ordered a surge. To the mountain, he commanded, his voice carried by courier spirits. Ashland wind funneled their cries into every ear. Inside the vault, Voryn advanced until he stood upon the final observation platform. A single Dwemer overseer, features drawn with both awe and terror, raised Wraithguard, the gauntlet humming with captured echoes. He shouted a warning, but Voryn replied with the resonant syllable taught by cavern dreams. The air quivered, Wraithguard's hum faltered. Keening's sibling flashed, and the gauntlet clattered to the floor. Voryn stared at the fallen tool. Briefly he considered lifting it, but some intuition stayed his hand. Instead he extended his palm toward the Heart. An ash-gray ripple flowed across his skin, responding to unseen currents. The Heart pulsed again, slower, deeper, like recognition. In that moment time dilated. According to Voryn's later recollections, fragmentary dream accounts preserved on corroded memory crystals, he heard voices layered atop one another, some speaking ancient chimeric, others in proto-Dwemer algorithmic clicks. They asked no questions, they sang declarative chords. He understood none fully, yet grasped that the Heart contained more than energy. It held memory of creation, sorrow of sundered worlds, and the promise of unfinished becoming. A tremor of longing coursed through him, to guard, to share, to reshape. Interrupting this communion, Dwemer defenders re-engaged. The keepers formed a circle around their lord, chanting countertones that deflected sonic blades. Yet the engineers had anticipated physical intrusion. They activated containment shields, erecting walls of shimmering force. Voryn, pressing both hands now against invisible barrier, felt the heart slip away, receding behind layers of Dwemer logic. Rage, swift and silent, seeped into his thought. He knew they intended to ignite the last sequence, to claim what was not theirs. At the same instant on the mountain's southeastern slope, Nerevar reached a breached access chamber. He found clouds of steam billowing as soldiers clashed with Centurion guardians. In the din, he discerned the underlying chord of activation, low, relentless. He turned to Vivek. "We must hasten," he said. Together with Alandro's soul, they fought inward, step by brutal step. Dizzying corridors twisted like intestines of brass. Stairwells shifted mid-stride as Dwemer geomantic defenses reconfigured themselves. Yet Chima relentlessness proved equal. Vivek severed control nodes by striking them with words that became cutting light. Sotha Sil projected glyphs that locked moving stairs into place. Nerevar's ring blazed, opening sealed hatches with pulses of star blue. Far below, Voryn sensed their approach like footfalls across a drumhead. He motioned for a temporary retreat, leading his keepers to a side annex where geothermal vents roared. There he recalibrated a handheld resonator salvaged earlier from a Dwemer technician to emit counterharmonics that destabilized containment patterns. The device pulsed, interfering with shielding layers. Static crackled. Briefly the heart gleamed unmasked, but the strain shook the cavern, fracturing basalt pillars. Rivers of magma seeped through cracks, bathing lower walkways in orange glare. Even dream-hardened keepers faltered beneath rising heat. Kagranak, monitoring from a command dais higher in the mountain, realized the sanctum's structural integrity teetered toward catastrophic breach. He issued override commands to collapse secondary tunnels, isolating the heart chamber from external incursion, even at the cost of burying his own engineers alive. Tremors thundered through rock, dust avalanched. Voryn steadied himself against a pillar, feeling through boot soles the deeper pulse of the mountain's agony. He thought of his clan's prophecy and the lullabies sung to children, promising a rebirth through fire. Was this not that moment? From high corridors, Nerevar's party finally burst into outer sanctum thresholds, just as shields flickered from Voryn's sabotage. The two factions converged amid chaos, Voryn and his keepers emerging smoke-shrouded from one side, Nerevar and allies from the other. Recognition flashed in their eyes, but there was no time for greetings. The heart, bathed in raw crimson light, hung exposed yet distant across a gulf of broken walkway. Between them and it stood the final Dwemer bulwark, towering Centurion titans braced with piston arms. Sotha Sil cried a warning. Vivek unleashed a poem so sharp it split metal. Still the titans advanced, furnace mouths exhaling molten slag. Dagoth keepers engaged, staff blades clashing against brass fists that weighed as anvils. Alandro's soul darted beneath flailing limbs, severing hydraulic tendons. Nerevar vaulted onto a titan's back, driving his moon-forged spear into optic arrays. In that pitched struggle, Kagranak appeared upon an overlooking bridge, Wraithguard newly donned upon his hand. Sunder rested across his shoulder, keening at his belt. He began to chant the final tonal sequence, a sequence rumored to unravel the distinction between flesh and brass, faith and certainty. Notes clanged off chamber walls, resonating with the heart. Every living soul felt bones vibrate. Some screamed as blood hummed in their veins. The heart brightened, veins of fiery gold spidering across its surface. Voryn shouted a countercall, a raw guttural sound dredged from dream memory. Vivek followed with a harmonic of his own, spun from starlight. Two opposing phrases met Medea, clashing like invisible cymbals. The resultant wave shattered platforms, casting combatants into magma-edged chasms, yet still Kagranak sang. Events accelerated beyond mortal perception. Later chroniclers would debate precise order, but all agree on fulcrum moments. Sotha Sil hurled a sigillite prism that refracted Kagranak's chant, inserting discordant overtones. Voryn leapt across a fractured span, landing upon Kagranak's bridge. They clashed, Sunder against Keening's sibling. Sparks of paradox ignited as dream and reason met. Nerevar, scrambling across fallen centurion rubble, saw Voryn's mask face inches from Kagranak's iron skull helm, two convictions locked in fatal duet. Then a surge. The heart emitted a tone lower than hearing yet felt in marrow. Lattice rings convulsed, seams in reality thinned. Some spoke of seeing the sky of Aetherius peek through cracks like blue fire beyond black stone. Kagranak raised sunder once more, but Nerevar's spear pierced his side. Blood spattered the bridge, sizzling upon hot metal. Kagranak staggered. In that hesitation, Voryn drove keening sibling through gaps in Wraithguard plating, twisting until circuits sputtered. The gauntlet spasmed, losing sync with the heart's pulse. Kagranak collapsed, tools dropping away. Silence, brief and absolute, filled the chamber. Yet the heart was awakened. It beat with deliberate cadence, as though considering. Every living mer felt themselves weighed against untold criteria. Voryn, blood-splattered mask dull beneath red glare, knelt and reached toward the heart. Nerevar shouted. The words were swallowed by roaring fissures. Vivek raised hand in warning, but Voryn's fingers brushed that incandescent surface, just a graze, no more. A coil of crimson light wound up his arm. He cried out, voice ragged, half prayer, half exaltation. The heart pulsed thrice. Stone cracked. Waves of heat burst outward. Many were flung backward, armor scorched. When the glare subsided, Voryn still knelt, but his mask had fused to his face, bronze edges melting into skin. Ash spread along his cheekbones, veins glowing ember bright beneath. He breathed, and each exhale carried sparks. The chamber teetered on collapse. Sotha Sil warned that the heart's feed lines destabilized. If not sealed, the mountain might vent its fury in a cataclysmic eruption. Nerevar, shaken yet resolute, ordered retreat so engineers could inspect if containment was still possible. Dagoth keepers formed a shield around their lord, guiding his unsteady steps towards safer ground. Voryn's gaze, now glowing, lingered on the heart with a mixture of longing and belonging. No one spoke of what transpired between him and that divine furnace. There would be time, or perhaps no time, for such reckoning. As surviving Chimer forces withdrew through ash-choked tunnels and Dwemer defenses lay shattered but not wholly spent, Red Mountain rumbled anew. Dust plumes spiraled into smoky twilight. Across Vivardenfell, farmers paused mid-harvest as their fields quaked. In far-flung strongholds, scribes steadied ink pots against shaking desks. The war was not ended, only thrust into its next, more terrible act. Whether Voryn's touch had saved or doomed them, none could yet know. But within every breast grew the certainty that the moment had pushed them beyond return. Chimer and Dwemer alike now orbited a single burning truth lodged at the mountain's heart. Ash settled over the wounded slopes like a second skin, muffling cries and cloaking the raw edges of shattered stone as the armies withdrew from the heart chamber's ruins. Columns of Chimer soldiers, their banners ragged and crusted with soot, descended the mountain in somber silence, each step measured against the tremor that continued to pulse beneath their feet. Red Mountain breathed in low, seismic intervals, as if testing the integrity of its own ribs after the violence that had cracked them. No council proclamations marked this retreat, no herald trumpeted orders. The land itself dictated the tempo, and the mer obeyed, aware that the slightest misstep upon shifting slopes could send entire cohorts into fumarolic chasms yawning open without warning. At the rear of the withdrawing host walked the keepers of the seventh sign, their dark masks dulled by heat-blistered patina. In their midst, Voryn Dagoth moved with measured slowness, each stride deliberate, as though he must recalibrate the length of his own legs to match some newly awakened rhythm. Beneath fused bronze, the faint ember light behind his eyes persisted, manifesting in quiet pulses that synced unnervingly with the distant heartbeat rumble still echoing from below. Those who marched nearest felt an itch across their skin, the hairs of their arms rising whenever that red glow brightened. No one spoke of it. War leaves too many fresh wounds for soldiers to dissect the strangeness within their own lines. The first bivouac established upon lower foothills bore little resemblance to previous war camps. Tents were pitched in close circles, canvas layered with ashcloth to deflect drifting embers. Ordained healers wandered the rings, administering draughts of marshmallow tea and packing wounds with powdered saltris, but there was an undercurrent of unease no poultice could salve. Rumors slipped between rows like cold wind, whispers that many Dwemer defenders had not simply fallen, but vanished mid-struggle, disappearing in flashes of violet light when the heart sounded its final note. Others spoke of brass titans found inert, their internal mechanisms fused as though struck by flame hotter than magma. Nerevar moved from fire to fire, quieting speculation with soothing words, yet even he could not quell the intangible sense that their victory had come at the cost of shattering some hidden covenant woven into the bones of the world. Shortly after midnight, the Provisional War Council reconvened within a stone-lined command pavilion lit by candles that sputtered in the sulfur-heavy air. Nerevar presided, armor hastily cleaned of caked ash. Vivek knelt upon a reed mat scrolling observations in a fluid script that glowed faintly with magicka. Ormelixia stood near the entrance, one hand pressed to a golden medallion depicting the three good Daedra. Sotha Sil, face half obscured by cog-like goggles, tinkered with a resonance gauge salvaged from Dwemer stockpiles, tapping its crystalline core to test whether the mountain's base frequency was still shifting. Alandro Sul maintained watch by the flap, listening for disturbances beyond the outer guards. When Voryn arrived flanked by two keepers, conversations stilled. He removed his helm with a deliberate motion. The fused fragments peeled back reluctantly, emitting a faint hiss. Beneath, his face appeared gaunt, skin discolored to the hue of pale ash, yet his gaze remained steady. Nerevar gestured for him to speak. Voryn described the breach, the moment Kagrenak collapsed, and the fleeting contact with the heart. He spoke without flourish, as though relating geological data. Yet, as he recalled the surge of voices inside the crimson light, a subtle tremor entered his tone, neither fear nor pride, but a quiet fervor. He concluded by insisting the Dwemer lattice remained partially functional and must be secured lest it awaken anew. Sotha Sil interrupted, observing that stabilizing the lattice without Kagrenak's master schema could be impossible. Vivek suggested sealing the inner chambers entirely, entombing the machine so no living mind might prod its secrets. Ormelixia, brows knitted in meditative calculation, proposed a period of vigil in prayer to gauge potential divine repercussions. Voices overlapped, but one unspoken tension threaded through every argument. What had the heart already done to Voryn, and what might it yet permit him to do? Before consensus formed, a runner burst inside, face smeared with soot, reporting multiple lava tubes collapsing along the east ridge, precisely where their supply lines coiled toward the uplands. Red Mountain, unsettled, was shedding debris like an animal shrugging fleas from its hide. Nerevar dismissed the council for the night, ordering command staff to reinforce hillside buttresses and prepare evacuation paths for non-combatants camped on the lower terraces. He instructed Voryn to rest, though rest hovered well beyond reach for one whose veins still hummed with unknown resonance. Beyond the circles of torchlight, Ashlander herders watched the spectacle from the wasteland flats. They saw no banners, no emblematic distinctions, only a long, wavering braid of torch points marking the exodus from mountain depths, reminding them of ancestral tales in which Veloth's people marched under haunted skies. Some whispered that the ghost of Trinamak had risen and wrathfully sundered the Dwemer, for who but an Idra slain could wield such unmaking? Others said Bothaya had swallowed their souls whole for daring to craft a god of brass. The truth, if truth existed at all amid such shifting myth, flowed unseen through stone like magma in hidden ducts. Morning arrived in dull oranges muted by thick smoke. Scouts surveying the battlefield discovered curious absences, Dwemer corpses scarce, many reduced to powdery husks, construct scrap oddly slagged, though fires never burned hot enough where they fell. In caverns once humming with tonal arrays, only pools of melted glass remained, cooling into rippled mirrors that reflected distorted sky. Sotha Sil collected samples, storing fragments in ceramic vials etched with warding runes. He muttered that the dissolution patterns resembled theoretical predictions for matter displaced across gradient thresholds between mundus and thought space. His companions could not parse the claim, but all sensed the uncanny heaviness of a place where reality had buckled. While soldiers labored with pick and shovel to reopen passage trails, Voryn retreated to a secluded tent, accompanied by his chief archivist, Dagoth Ildros. Ildros recorded every account Voryn could recall from the heart touch, cadence intervals, color gradations, the precise sensation when his skin met divine flame. Between dictations, Voryn lapsed into silence, eyes tracking invisible geometries across rough canvas walls. On occasion, he pressed fingertips to the tent floor as if gauging heartbeat rhythms from deep below. Ildros, though loyal, could not help but note that his lord's pupils flickered with sparks even in dim light. He wrote in marginalia, "My lord is altered but not diminished. He listens to unheard choirs." 2 days passed before the council reassembled. By then, fresh reports confirmed what rumor had birthed. Dwemer citadels across Risdane stood eerily vacant. Scouts entered En-Chuleft and found forges extinguished, gears motionless. Only the faint echo of water dripping through silent turbine shafts persisted. In Bamzamshand amphitheaters, rows of stone benches lay coated in thin frost, as if heat had been siphoned away in an instant. No living Dwemer greeted the intruders, not alive, not dead. The race had vanished like morning mist, leaving footprints evaporating in sunlight. Sotha Sil, confronted with the findings, surmised that Kagranak's final chords had triggered an ontological recall, displacing all Dwemer attuned to the lattice into a state outside present perception. Whether they existed elsewhere or nowhere, he could not say, a riddle to trouble metaphysicians for eras to come. But the practical matter remained. Their armies had dissolved, yet their machines, unattended, still clung to phantom routines. Some constructs continued patrol loops, heedless of new masters. Others powered down, awaiting commands that would never again cross brass transmitters. The silence of the Dwemer sealed a new, chilling reality. The heart was now unguarded, but for those who had tried to claim it. Nerevar convened his closest companions within the still smoldering dome of Old Sotha, chosen for its intact wards and relative safety. There, he announced intention to return to the mountain's core to determine how best to secure or destroy the heart, lest its power tempt unwise hands. Vivek pledged support, as did Olmelixia, though unease shadowed her vow. Sotha Sil volunteered analytic oversight. When Nerevar turned to Voryn, seated apart from the council circle, the Dagoth Lord inclined his head once, expression unreadable. Before departure, Nerevar sought guidance from Azura through ancestral rites performed at the Lunar Temple upon Molag Amua's ridge. Azura's chosen seers painted their eyelids with moonstone dust and inhaled deep draughts of dream herb. They spoke of tidal fates curling inward like shells of black glass, of betrayal born from wounded certainty, of a falsehood buried in ash waiting to rupture. When Nerevar pressed them for clarity, starlight passed through their gazes and they wept, unable to articulate the vision fully. Such cryptic messages were hardly unusual among Azura's faithful, yet Nerevar felt an unprecedented chill. He redoubled vows to approach the heart with utmost caution, and to bind all decisions within oaths sworn before the good Daedra and the elder ancestors. The ascent began again, though with smaller company: Nerevar, Vivek, Olmelixia, Sotha Sil, Alandro Sul, Voryn Dagoth, and a retinue of appointed shield-bearers. They advanced in the hush of dawn, windless air thick with sulphurous haze. Where armies recently thundered, only sparse clusters of ordinators stood guard, their insect carapace helms gleaming faintly as they bowed the path open for their lord and his companions. Along switchback trails, inscrutable glyphs now traced the ground, etchings of Dwemer algorithmic script overlaying chalk sigils of Dagoth design. The marks throbbed with residual magicka, causing footfalls to echo as though the stone itself resounded like a drum. In places, the mountain exhaled steam dense enough to obscure a full arm's length, forming spectral veils that parted reluctantly before the travelers. They reached the breached gateway where previous battle had splintered bronze doors. Interior passages showed signs of ad hoc shoring by Cavalli masons, timber struts wedged into cracked archways, braided copper wire binding compromised lintels. Even so, small pebbles fell intermittently as distant quakes continued. Sotha Sil led, scanning resonance vectors with his gauge, murmuring corrections to Alandro Sol, who rotated luminescent crystals to neutralize stray tonal loops. Behind them, Voryn walked in trance-like stillness, occasionally lifting his head as though distant music guided his steps. The heart chamber, when finally they entered, lay transformed. The collapsed lattice rings had partially realigned into a new configuration, neither Kagranak's original spindle nor the shattered remains they had left behind. Segments floated freely, connected by threads of red-gold plasma, weaving an orbit around the central gem that pulsed with methodical solemnity. Magma streams flowing through floor fissures now curved inward, their glow spiraling up like molten pillars, feeding energy into the suspension field. The chamber buzzed faintly, not in mechanical ticks, but in deep, resonant chords that vibrated bones and memory alike. Nerevar halted the party at the observation ledge and ordered their retainers to stay back. He, Vivek, Olmelixia, and Sotha Sil stepped forward. Voryn advanced unbidden, halting at the very edge of the broken platform where once he had fallen to his knees. Ember light in his eyes brightened, casting twin halos upon the smooth obsidian floor. A thin tremor rocked the ledge, dust cascaded into magma below. Sotha Sil began a diagnostic litany, reciting sequences that folded speech with hand signs, instructing ambient energies to reveal structural composition. His words created filaments of pale light that stretched toward the lattice, mapping eddies and nodes. He concluded the system's self-repair would eventually restore full function, though in unknown configuration, and only the tools forged by Kagranak could modulate it safely. Those tools lay now upon a stone dais, Sunder's haft scorched, Keening's blade intact, Wraithguard dented but resonant. To use them again mandated careful agreement, for they represented both salvation and annihilation in a single breath. Nerevar suggested they each swear upon ancestor spirits that any future use of the heart would serve only the welfare of Rizdane. Vivek placed hand over heart and assented. Olmelixia agreed, though her eyes lingered on the heart with fascination. Sotha Sil voiced neither assent nor dissent, but asked that the oath include clauses for scientific study toward the betterment of all mortal kind. Nerevar accepted. He then turned to Voryn. The Dagoth Lord's expression remained distant. When asked to swear, he hesitated, quiet stretched. Finally, in a voice raw as volcanic glass, he replied that he had already sworn to the mountain itself, an earlier covenant beyond mortal wording. He would not forswear that bond by layering lesser oaths atop it. Tension sprung like a drawn bow. Vivek's gaze narrowed. Olmelixia shifted weight as though readying for intervention. Alandro Sol gripped the haft of his spear. Nerevar raised a calming hand, but concern etched deep across his brow. He acknowledged Voryn's claim, yet insisted no single oath could supersede obligation to people and ancestors both. Voryn countered that the mountain was ancestor and future in one, and thus his promise conflicted with nothing. Debate slipped toward impasse. Sotha Sil broke it by announcing his intention to record lattice parameters immediately, urging resolution later. They set camp in an anteroom where Dwemer artisans once etched numeric hymns into brass plates. Night cycles held little meaning within the lava-lit vault, yet fatigue compelled rest. Nerevar asked Alandro Sol to keep watch while he meditated in prayer. Vivek wandered corridors tracing poem sigils along walls to anchor memory of pathways. Olmelixia tended to ordinator escorts, offering them words of valor. Sotha Sil sketched schematics upon parchments infused with spore ink that shimmered across diagrams. Voryn lingered closest to the heart chamber, seated cross-legged at threshold, eyes half-lidded, breathing in tempo with the slow throb of red light. In that suspended hush, many threads of fate twisted. Alandro Sol, packing ramparts, saw within torch glare that Voryn's shadow crawled across stone at odds with flame direction, as if lit from a hidden pyre beneath his skin. Vivek, returning from his walk, noted scrap metal trembling, orienting toward Voryn like filings to lodestone. Olmelixia sensed an odor of ozone, reminiscent of storm waters churning above Mournhold's high towers during monsoon season, though no breeze stirred here. Each made mental note, but refrained from immediate confrontation, deferring to Nerevar, yet forming judgment. Come what passed for dawn in molten depths, the council assembled again. Sotha Sil recommended a temporary stasis field be erected around the heart, while he devised a replicable harmonic key that could activate or deactivate its power under controlled conditions. Such a field required synergy of tonal magic and tribally sanctioned prayer matrices. Vivek and Omelixia volunteered to weave liturgical chords. Nereva proposed delaying until he could consult additional house leaders. Voryn objected, stating delay increased risk of foreign intrusion, implying, though not naming, the distant yet ever-curious Cyrodiilic remnant of Aelid lineage or emergent Nord opportunists seeking mythic weapons. He insisted that House Dagoth remain as permanent guardians, drawing upon their generational reverence. Debate sharpened, voices rose. At crux of argument, Voryn stepped toward the dais, placing hand upon Keening's hilt. Sparks jumped between granite and fingertips. The heart pulsed, responding. In that moment, every mer present heard a whisper in mind's ear, not words but a chord more intimate than speech. Some recoiled. Others, Voryn foremost, leaned into it as into cherished lullaby. He declared the heart acknowledged his stewardship. Any who contested risked fracturing the already tenuous harmony binding mountain and people. Nereva advanced, met Voryn near the edge of a shallow chasm cut by magma stream. His voice held sorrow more than anger. He reminded Voryn of the oath they once swore together upon Kogorun's basalt, to safeguard prophecy for their people, not for personal ascension. Voryn's lips parted in faint smile tinged with pain. He replied prophecy demanded shepherd, and shepherd must dwell within the dream to understand it fully. He gestured to his scarred visage, claiming he had already stepped across threshold of mortal limitation for the sake of this charge. Nereva countered that one step did not guarantee clarity, only peril. His hand shifted to his blade's pummel. The air thickened with unshed violence. Vivek and Omelixia drew near, spells shimmering at fingertips. Sotha Sil activated clockwork turbines along his braces, gears clicking. Alandro Sol positioned himself between factions, spear low. The mountain's heart thudded louder, stone dust danced swirling micro-vortices. For a heartbeat none breathed. Conflict was averted not by persuasion, but by cataclysm. A quake surged stronger than any prior. Platforms buckled, a basalt column sheared free, smashing through walkway. Streams of magma erupted, lashing like fiery serpents. The heart jarred, cried a tone that made vision blur, a sound that felt like memory tearing. Voryn stumbled back. Sotha Sil shouted that containment seams in underlying bedrock had failed, collapse of vault imminent. Retreat paths, demarcated on earlier maps, now glowed red, with emergent lava flooding. There was no time left to debate. They fled, navigating by intuition, as corridors belched steam and ceilings rained molten droplets. Twice they doubled back around cave-ins. Ordinators perished beneath falling slabs. The survivors forged ahead carrying wounded. At a fork, Sotha Sil halted, scanning resonance gauge, choosing left where vibrations lower. Omelixia chanted protective sheens guarding against heat. Vivek's poems calmed panicked soldiers, coaxing them across narrow ledges bridging boiling fissures. Mid-flight, Voryn vanished from formation, slipping through a side passage none else noticed. Alandro Sol glimpsed ember glimmer down that route, but had no moment to pursue. Hours later, battered and half-choked by fumes, the party emerged outside upon ashen slopes under night sky streaked with auroral currents caused by horrific particulates swirling high above. They counted numbers, 10 ordinators dead, several more maimed. No sign of Voryn Dagoth or his keepers. Nereva insisted they could not leave him within collapsing vault. Volunteers formed search parties despite risk of aftershocks. Dawn light broke behind mountain silhouette as they re-entered lesser tunnels. They scoured passages only to find abrupt dead ends newly sealed by obsidian glass. Hammering upon walls yielded dull, lifeless echoes. It was as though the mountain had reabsorbed those paths, closing around whatever remained inside. Grief mingled with confusion as they regrouped. Vivek suggested Voryn might have found another exit. Sotha Sil observed faint magnetic anomalies near Southern Ridge that could mark an emergent crater vent. Alandro Sol argued they must assume he still lived, given what transformation had already begun. Nerevar ordered watchers posted along every major vent and fjorda, hopping to intercept their friend. Days passed. Relief camps across Vivardenfell received refugees from ash-buried villages, though few recognized the scale of what had transpired. House councils rotated wagons of saltras and quama eggs toward displaced families. Yet behind philanthropic veneer lay fear. Dwemer had vanished utterly, leaving a power vacuum yawning like Crater Moor. Rumor networks asked whether Kagranak's brass god might still stir beneath molten sheets, directed by unknown hands. Some pointed to House Dagoth and whispered treachery. Others suggested tribunal leaders schemed to claim Dwemer secrets for themselves. Trust, once fragile, now cracked into schisms. Nerevar convened a conclave of great house councillors upon the plains outside Vivek's nascent city, a locale chosen for neutral footing. There he reported Dwemer disappearance and the unstable state of the heart. He proposed a provisional stewardship wherein he, Vivek, Olmelixia, and Sotha Sil would guard and study the artifact under strict oversight by all houses, with transparency codified by scribal witnesses representing each clan. Support wavered. Drez and Redoran favored the plan, citing trust in Nerevar's honor. Telvanni archmagisters balked, wanting unfettered research rights. Without Voryn present, Dagoth councillors sat in cold silence, then finally voted abstention, citing absence of their lord and uncertainty of his fate. Stalemate loomed. That night, Azura appeared in a dream vision shared among Vivek, Olmelixia, and Sotha Sil simultaneously. She stood upon a shoreline of black glass reflecting twin moons, her voice a hush of tide over bone. She warned that choices ahead would fracture destinies, that even noble aims might birth ashes if sung in selfish keys. She spoke of the Nerevarine yet unborn, of prophecy requiring betrayal to seed renewal. Upon waking, the three met privately, exchanging fragments of the vision. A sense of somber inevitability gathered around them. Meanwhile, in caverns none could map, Voryn Dagoth breathed cinder-laden air alongside 7 of his closest keepers. They had found refuge within sub-basalt hollows where the mountain's heat bled gentle rather than searing. There, under faint glow of lichen fed by mineral vapor, Voryn addressed his followers. His voice had grown lower, overtones layered like harmonics of a deep bell. He explained that the heart called to them, asking guardianship free of external compromise. The mountain, he claimed, had chosen them because only those who dreamt its dreams since childhood could fuse will with its pulse. He bade them rest, heal, and listen, for transformation was not instant, but a patient blooming like stone flowers in slow time. They accepted, binding fresh copper wire around wrists to symbolize commitment. In that hush, they meditated, heartbeat aligning with subterranean thrum, until personal identity blurred into collective hush. Days later, beneath clear midday sky at Vivek's camp, a courier arrived bearing unexpected news. A lone Dagoth retainer had staggered through Aldrune claiming his lord lived in hidden chambers, healing and preparing to resume stewardship. The messenger, scarcely coherent, spoke of dreams merging with waking, of voices promising a new dawn unmarred by betrayal. He asked audience with Nerevar, but collapsed before reaching the main tent, blood seeping from nostrils, skin blotched with grey lesions. He died clutching at unseen specters. Sotha Sil examined the corpse, noting tissue necrosis akin to accelerated corpus, though lacking typical tumors. He theorized exposure to concentrated tonal energies had warped cellular lattice. Word of the affliction spread. Soon commoners whispered of the Blight, a plague born of mountain wrath. Suspicion thickened. Some houses accused Dagoth remnants of engineering disease to undermine rivals. Others claimed tribunal mages toyed with Dwemer sorcery that backfired. Trade coffers tightened as caravans diverted routes away from Vivardenfell entirely. Morag Tong writs multiplied, hired assassins preying on voices too loud in blame. The fractures threatened to shatter the fragile unity for which Nerevar had fought. In final effort to preserve alliance, Nerevar summoned the three, Vivek, Olmelixia, Sotha Sil to his private command yurt one starless evening. He laid out a radical course. They must journey once more to the heart, this time to employ Kagranak's tools under controlled ritual supervision, severing or containing the divine engine before anyone, whether Dagoth, tribunal, or foreign power, could exploit it further. It would be perilous, misuse risked catastrophe greater than Dwemer's erasure. Yet inaction, he argued, ensured slow decay through paranoia and plague. The tribunal agreed, though each carried private reservations shaped by Azura's warning. Preparations commenced in secrecy. Only a handful of trusted guards knew departure time. They ventured under cloak of midnight, leaving faint trail markers to mislead spies. Their journey mirrored earlier ascent, but absent fanfare, quick and precise. At the mountain base, where steam vents belched scarlet vapor, ordinator escorts remained behind. The three and Nerevar continued alone, their footfalls echoing softly against glassy rock. Starshine filtered through ash haze overhead, intoning the vast silence of cosmos, uninterested in mortal tribulation. Entering inner chambers, they discovered access tunnels strangely unblocked, as though opened in invitation. No construct stirred, Dwemer wards remained dormant. They reached the Heart's Hall to find lattice columns realigned into perfect concentric orbitals, humming stable chord in C-sharp minor if one possessed ear for such nuance. Upon dais keening and Sunder lay where last seen, gleaming with unnatural freshness, as though molten slag had cleansed them. Wraithguard, once dented, appeared reforged. Sotha-Sil verified integrity, then fitted the gauntlet upon Nerevar's arm, getting straps into place. Nerevar flexed fingers, circuits lit pale blue along veins. He lifted Sunder and Keening, testing weight. Vivek and Omelixia took positions at equidistant vertices, weaving stabilizing mantras in low Daedric to quell potential surge. Nerevar stepped onto a narrow bridge extending toward the heart. Red radiance cloaked him in silhouette. He began sequence taught by Sotha-Sil, strike with Sunder to loosen Godflesh shell, then cut vital filaments with Keening in precise order to sever connection, rendering the heart inert yet intact. First blow fell, sound rang like bell forged in starfire. Heart flared, lattice shrieked, stone shook. Second blow followed. Then a voice, neither echo nor hallucination, spoke from shadow beyond platform. Voryn Dagoth emerged, features more stark, eyes twin furnaces, masked now by living ash that shifted across skin like sifting embers. He pleaded with Nerevar to stop, arguing severance would slay spirit of land, doom Chima's soul to wander rootless. Nerevar, heart heavy, asked his old friend to stand down, promising council decisions guided by wisdom, not ambition. Voryn reached out a hand, beseeching. From fingertips trailed cinnabar strands of energy bridging nothingness. Behind him 7 figures stood, former keepers, their forms flickering with heat mirage distortion. Words faltered, suspicion sharpened. Nerevar sensed time slipping, heart's pulse quickening, feedback loops accelerating. He refused to halt. Voryn's countenance hardened, sorrow eclipsed by fierce conviction. He raised his own resonance rod, improvised from Dwemer scrap imbued with heart's breath. Vivek shouted warning, Omelixia flung light blade of magicka to intercept. Clash erupted upon narrow bridge. Sparks of sound and flame snapped. Sotha-Sil triggered failsafe glyphs, but feedback warped spells destabilizing ground. Amid duel Nerevar landed third strike. The heart shrieked, fissures spidering. Voryn reeled yet pressed assault. With Keening poised for severing cut, Nerevar advanced, then faltered when Voryn whispered a childhood oath they once shared beneath Kogorun stars. Hesitation split a heartbeat. In that margin Voryn thrust resonance rod toward Wraithguard. A surge ignited. Nerevar staggered, gauntlet sizzling. Keening clattered to stone. Vivek and Omelixia rushed forward, but platforms sheared. Magma flared, forcing them back. Sotha-Sil shouted that field harmonics decayed, heart generating lethal feedback. Decisions compressed within breaths. Accounts diverge here. Some chronicles claim Vivek, seeing inevitability, signaled Omelixia. Together they unleashed combined spells searing Voryn and forcing him from bridge, while Sotha-Sil shielded Nerevar. Others whisper darker tale, that in chaos tribunal perceived opportunity, power within reach to heal province and elevate Myr, if only Nerevar no longer barred path. Regardless, chamber burst in blinding conflagration. When dust settled, Nerevar lay mortally wounded, armor cracked, Wraithguard fused askew to arm. Voryn had vanished, fallen into churning magma below or spirited deeper by tunnels unseen. Vivek cradled dying Hortator. Omelixia whispered hymns, gathering his blood upon silk cloth. Sotha Sil worked fruitlessly to stabilize heart rhythm. Nerevar's fatting eyes sought them, lips framing plea, protect his people, prevent misuse of heart. They swore. With last breath, he entrusted tools to their care. Silence swallowed final exhale, mountain tremor subsided as though holding vigil. What followed remains contested by every historian. Tribunal accounts state they mourned, then resolved to honor Nerevar's charge by wielding Kagranak's tools themselves, not to dominate, but to become divine guardians strong enough to defend Morrowind forever. They performed rite unseen by any witness, Vivek bearing keening, Olmelixia gidding sunder, Sotha Sil modulating Wraithguard calibrations. Together they tapped Heart's power, rewriting their flesh into living gates of star miracles. Light without shadow filled hall, their bodies glowed hues of dawn and dusk intermingled. In distant corridors, Dagoth loyalists felt shockwave of transformation. Some collapsed, senses aflame, others convulsed, skin hardening into grey scales. They awakened changed, first Ash vampires awakening to new bond with Voryn Dagoth, who now named himself Dagoth Ur, Heart Warden and Dreamer Lord. Across Vivardenfell, sleepers tossed in huts and manor beds alike, dreaming of red tunnels and the sixth house reborn. When the tribunal emerged from the mountain days later, they did so glimmering with quiet godhood. They displayed no joy, only solemn recognition of duty accepted. They proclaimed Nerevar had died from wounds sustained in battle with remnant Dwemer automatons, a narrative easier for houses to accept than in a conflict. Dagoth Ur presumed slain alongside Dwemer. Great houses, grieving and weary, embraced new living gods who promised deliverance from plague and prosperity in unity. Temples raised statues, ordinators adopted new creeds. Skeptics murmured, but bright miracles, rain summoned over parched crop fields, ash storms stilled by raised hand of Olmelixia, silenced many. Yet in cooled magma chambers beneath Red Mountain, Dagoth Ur stirred, cocooned by obsidian like shell around chrysalis. Within his breast, the echo of Heart's song thrummed intimate and unbroken. Betrayal burned but transmuted into purpose, to seize full power, cast false tribunal down, and offer Tamriel a new dream unshackled from lineage of failing gods. Around him, his brothers, Dagoth Vemin, Dagoth Odros, Dagoth Endus, others, rose from vents, eyes gold-red, voices resonating in unison. They would wait centuries if needed. The mountain was patient, and dreams older than stone need not hurry. Above, seasons turned. The tribunal instituted groundworks, construction of Vivek, the City of Swords, repair of Ghost Fence to contain blighted storms, codification of temple doctrines extolling their ascension as fulfillment of Velothi faith. People rebuilt, harvests flourished, yet rumors of coughing sickness carried on east winds. Travelers along Foyada trails sometimes glimpsed ash figures watching from ridges, disappearing when approached, leaving footprints that smoldered. Pilgrims reported voices, in dreams, bidding them return to house, sixth long thought dead. Within memory halls of each great house, scribes debated writing official histories. Dwemer vanished by hubris, Nerevar perished heroically, tribunal rose for common good. Some elders hesitated, suspecting omissions, yet parchment welcomes certainty over doubt, and with each iteration, the sanctioned tale hardened like cooling glass. Thus the world entered a new equilibrium, calm upon surface, restless beneath. The heart, partly sealed by tribunal ritual, continued to pulse, chords of divine song threaded through stone, tugging at souls attuned by ancestry or dream. Dagoth Ur listened from depths, shaping his will into quiet tides that seeped outward, carrying spores of blight and murmurs of sleepers. The tribunal, radiant above, fostered temples and pennied sermons, yet felt faint tremors where divinity met stolen power, like hairline cracks spreading beneath lacquer. So closed the war's overt chapter, but opened an unending twilight where victory and defeat blurred, where gods walked yet mortals still bled, where prophecy coiled upon itself like Ouroboros' gnawing tail. In the hush between heartbeats of mountain and empire alike, two destinies, Tribunal's luminous vigilance and Dagoth Ur's volcanic dream, circled one another in slow orbit, awaiting hour when the past incarnate, the Nerevarine, would rise to judge the worth of both. Until that hour, Red Mountain remained a wound scabbed with glass, glowing in night like a sullen ember under ash-heavy sky, remembering every oath, every betrayal, every prayer its children ever whispered into the smoke. Centuries unfolded in the hush beneath Red Mountain, their passage measured not by the ticking of formal chronologies, but by the slow settling of ash upon basalt plains and the rhythmic expansion of the Ghost Fence's blue fire. In the early years after Nerevar's passing, the tribunal walked openly among their people, luminous as dawn over Vivek's half-built cantons. They offered miracles that rendered famine a rumor and plague an aberration. Crops of saltris sprouted in alkaline flats where even guar weeds once withered, and the Dwemer, now formally renamed from Chima as a sign of transformation and penance, embraced their new theoch with fervor that blurred into dependency. Yet beneath that gilded surface lay tremors, small at first, like hairline cracks in cooling glass. The heart's song still threaded through rock, and Dagoth Ur, cocooned within obsidian shells, dreamt beneath miles of pumice corridors. His mind, once distinct, diffused through molten stone until it brushed the tribunal's own sense, like a phantom breeze too slight to name. The first outward sign emerged as a shift in weather patterns over Vivardenfell. Ash storms, long common, grew strangely rhythmic, coalescing around lunar phases rather than prevailing winds. Miners returning from Ilunibai reported gusts that whispered in semi-coherent phrases, promising release from toil. At Ghostgate garrisons, buoyant armigers found splotches of red fungus blooming inside sealed storerooms, feeding on nothing visible. Scholars of the Tribunal Temple dismissed these anomalies as natural flux under recent geothermal upheaval, yet field ordinators noted that each aberration's epicenter aligned with subterranean vents leading toward once-forgotten Dwemer strongholds. Endusal, Odrosal, Veminal citadels now fused to Dagoth Ur's will. Deep within those citadels, 7 lieutenants, ash vampires who had once borne ordinary Dagoth names, awoke one by one. Their rebirths unfolded not in synchronized pageantry, but in localized pulses as the heart's power seeped along fault lines. Dagoth Vemin rallied first, his lair at Veminal resonating with low thrum that cracked Dwemer brass plating like old ice. Servitors of living rock, clip-shaped Atronachs mined from ebony seams, gathered to him, molding themselves into new ramparts. Dagoth Odros rose next amid corroded aquifers, transforming stagnant steam into choking red mists that drifted through forgotten pressure valves. Odros began to experiment, mixing ash spores with condensate until the vapor carried dreams as infective as any spore. Dagoth Endus, philosophic even in altered state, set about recasting broken Dwemer numerals into glyphs that restructured harmonic flows, thereby widening the radius through which collective thought might be drawn into sleep. Each lieutenant bent his domain to refine a single facet of their shared objective: rebuild the Sixth House not as mortal faction, but as dream realm overlapping waking stone. On the surface, the tribunal sensed a faint dimming in their borrowed divinity each time they ventured to Red Mountain to refresh their power at the heart. Vivek recorded in his 35th sermon that during one ascent, the heart's glow wavered, forcing him to strain new metaphors from memory to keep magicka coursing. Olmelixia found Keening's keystone note slightly off pitch, an infinitesimal shift only she, attuned by centuries of choral ritual, could detect. Sothasil observed Wraithguard registering higher resonant impedance, as though some external circuit now lay in parallel. They discussed these anomalies in hushed conclaves upon floating lunar pads inside the Clockwork City, reasoning that residual Dwemer constructs might be spasming in death throes. None yet fathomed that Dagoth Ur, heart-linked, drew upon the same source, for how could any logic suggest that one mer might siphon from a well already claimed by gods? Among common folk, omens multiplied. A fisherman on Azura's coast dreamed of a faceless prophet speaking from a ribcage throne, and upon waking, found barnacles fused to his ankles. Traders along the Foyadas encountered caravans mysteriously abandoned, netch carts overturned beside neat piles of ash shaped like sleeping bodies. In Barmora, House H. Lalu bookkeepers noticed erratic shifts in ebony export yields as quarry workers succumbed to a wasting illness marked by grey lesions and uncanny resilience, the early form of corpus that healers could neither purge nor fully describe. Yet because the tribunal's miracles still glimmered, healing wells in Vivec, oracular fountains in Mournhold, faith scholars folded these disturbances into sermons on divine trial, assuring the laity that watchful gods tempered their children through hardship. It was Sothus Sil, ever methodical, who first quantified the pattern. He dispatched bronze insect drones into cavern systems ringing Red Mountain, instructing them to stream multilinear data on thaumic flux. The results revealed a tidal rhythm roughly 18 years long, peaking whenever all three tribunes absented themselves simultaneously from the heart for pilgrimages abroad. During these peaks, interior ash density surged, and spectral anomalies, later named corpuscular fragments, multiplied. Sil traced phase angles of the waveforms back to a central node below the Dwemer cavern formerly labeled Aculachan Chamber. He annotated in his notebooks that the node's signature bore hallmarks of Vespertine dreamwork, a class of metaphysical manipulation previously theorized but never observed. The capacity to imprint will upon mortal subconscious by modulating dream substrate physics. In simpler words, someone deep inside the mountain was learning to speak through the sleeping minds of Vivardenfell's populace. Sothus Sil presented his findings to Vivec and Olmelixia within the sermon chamber of the Ministry of Truth, the great moonbar above the city that hovered by discreet divine intervention. They deliberated for 3 nights while void bats circled the inert moonstone. Each divine confronted the ethical dimension of their own power. To maintain sovereignty required occasional return to power they had taken, not earned. To relinquish that power invited chaos and possible foreign dominion by imperials or Nordic jarls. Their solution was pragmatic: reinforce containment. They directed temple engineers and Telvanni magisters to pool arcane knowledge and erect a barrier unlike any built before. The Ghost Fence, a wall of lightning drawn from the souls of fallen ordinators and bound within great spires of enchanted bone. Such a fence would encircle Red Mountain's caldera, starving nascent Blight of easy egress and confining Dagoth Ur, if he indeed stirred, to his volcanic cradle. Construction spanned decades. Pilgrims volunteered for soul binding with stoic pride, believing their deaths would echo as lighthouses of holy fire. The process distilled each life into luminous motes, funneled into hollowed carapace pylons modeled after the shell of the extinct dragon turtle of Padamaic depth. When the final nexus stone was set, Olmelixia presided over the ignition. Blue fire surged along the fence, meeting at cardinal pylons to form a shimmering dome visible from Vivec's temple terraces. For a time, the ash storms lessened and Blight cases leveled. Merchants resumed trading. Households kindled netched jelly lanterns with thanksgiving. Children sang lullabies of the mother's mercy shining in the dark. Yet the Ghost Fence bore 2 flaws. First, it demanded perpetual infusions of souls to sustain output, a hunger discreetly supplied by condemned criminals and nameless dissidents. Second, energy drawn from the heart remained finite. Every cycle the tribunal dedicated to fueling the fence was a cycle dennied to the maintenance of their own apotheosis. In the short span of mere lifetimes, this trade looked equitable. Across centuries it became a bleed. Dagoth Ur, separated yet still linked, adapted. When storms could not spread his miasma, he planted it directly into dreams. Sleepers, ordinary Dwemer artisans, scouts, even minor priests awoke from restless nights hearing drums, perceiving a red cavern beyond eyelids. Voices told them to build shrines in cellars, to carve 6th house symbols into kiln bricks, to gather ash salts and breathing masks for the day of the sleeper's great awakening. They obeyed with feverish devotion, often in secret, for the temple's informants prowled. The 6th house cult bore marks of inversion. Where tribunal temple prescribed orderly liturgy, the cult fostered ecstatic chant. Where temple extolled chastity of mind, the cult embraced vision states induced by fumes vented from volcanic glass. Ritual leaders wore mask helms fashioned after Voryn Dagoth's fused visage, elongated snouts, and blank ocular cavities glowing faintly red from inner braziers. They preached that true freedom lay not in worshipping stolen divinity, but in merging with the universal dream. Lord Dagoth's mind made unbroken, they called it. By late Second Era, pockets of Sixth House numbers dotted Vivardenfell from Nar Mok Salt Flats to the fungal glades near Tel Mora, though few outside local rumor networks recognized common cause among them. Imperial annexation of Morrowind under Tiber Septim imposed new vectors of tension. The Treaty of the Armistice granted the Dwemer autonomy in exchange for a measure of imperial law and garrison presence. Vivek, architect of that bargain, displayed the power of Bar Dao, the Ministry Moon, hovering precariously above his city as implicit deterrent. But to Dagoth Ur, the treaty signaled foreign dilution of the dream's purity. Within his citadel now named Lorkhan, he paced great obsidian galleries, plotting not merely defense, but liberation of Tamriel from what he deemed deceitful gods and tyrannical man. He studied Kagranak's machinery still fused beneath magma, scheming how it might be reborn not as Numidium, but as Lorkhan, a second heart-born giant sculpted in his own image. Each Ash vampire lieutenant was dispatched to salvage tonal fragments and recruit sleeper cells to procure rare minerals, elaborate resonators, and living test subjects for corpuscular experiments. One experiment produced the Ash Ghoul, born from a Dres slave trader afflicted by Corpus and offered as tithe. The subject was immersed in heartbreak chant vibrations until flesh melted into muscular gray slurry and reformed around bone in elongated spines. Lungs converted to filter volcanic particulate, vocal cords restructured to speak pure resonance, no syllables. These new ghouls served as intermediaries between Dagoth forces and mortal followers, delivering instructions in dream overtones too complex for simple throats. Another experiment birthed the Ash Priest, robed figures whose eyes lacked iris, filmed with shimmering glaze. They could trigger localized ash bursts from palms, incubating spores directly within victim lungs. Temple exorcists who engaged them found silence as deadly as flame. Spells fizzled around them, disrupted by antiphonal hum keyed to heart's minor extensions. Despite these alarming evolutions, temple leadership remained complacent for generations, misreading the Blight as cyclical and perceiving the cult as fringe. The tribunal's own waning glow they attributed to natural ebb of cosmic winds. In truth, their burdens weighed heavier each century. Olmelixia grew irritable during public audiences, her once gentle benedictions edged with command. Vivek retreated deep into his palace library to write new cantatas that wrestled with self-doubt disguised as metaphor. Sotha isolated himself in the Clockwork City, driving tonal screws ever tighter into echo chambers where only automata listened. Each paid visits to the heart less frequently, for journey past Ghost Fence exposed them to Dagoth Ur's swelling presence, a psychic static that drummed accusations into their skulls. Thieves, oathbreakers, betrayers of friend and faith. During one such pilgrimage at the dawn of Third Era Year 400, Olmelixia and Vivek found the central corridor to the heart chamber altered. Ash furniture and basalt statuary lined the path, carved in likeness of Dagoth Ur's face wreathed in fire. Chant drifted from unseen throats, reciting their own sermons back to them but warped. We are the new tribunal, the unbroken triad of dreamer, dream, and dreaming. No physical foe appeared, yet the air weighed heavy with presence. When they reached the heart chamber, they discovered Wraithguard's resonance settings tampered. The protective gauntlet now emitted inverse harmonic licks that strung their skin even before contact. They managed to renew their divine link, but only with greater strain, and on leaving Vivek privately confided to Olmelixia that their power felt thinner, as though siphoned in real time. Sotha responded by forging the Proto-Numidium Nullifier, a colossal tuning fork anchored beneath the Clockwork City, designed to broadcast phase-canceling waves at any future brass colossus Dagoth Ur might build. Yet this device required constant magicka tithes, further depleting his reserves. Olmelixia, turning outward, intensified temple dogma, instructing ordinators to crack down on heresies. Streets of Mournhold saw proscription lists posted, names scratched by night, and dragged at dawn to prison hymns. Vivek attempted balance, ordering canon revision to fold Dagoth's narrative into cautionary allegory, the friend who fell. But red dreams spread faster than sermons, for in Dream, the listener felt a personal touch upon the brow, a lullaby of belonging no distant god could match. By mid-Third Era, Blight storms breached Ghost Fence more frequently, each breach corresponding to sacrifice failures or pylon fractures. Corpus mutated into grotesque variants. Hulking ascended sleepers roamed lava canals, whining in broken Merethic, prophesying return of the one true house. Imperial legionaries stationed at Moonmoth Fort reported nightly visions, causing desertion and madness. When inquiries reached the Elder Council in Cyrodiil, they dismissed Thales as provincial superstition, until Blightborn fever wiped out an entire garrison at Buckmoth inside weeks. Amid these crises, a scholar-healer named Divathfer isolated himself on Telfer Peninsula, studying corpus strains in hope of cure. He concluded the disease, while monstrous, conferred immortality of a warped kind, halting cellular degeneration even as form collapsed. For hypothesized that Dagoth Ur's endgame might involve mass infection and subsequent redemption, folding all Dwemer into a single metamorphic superorganism tuned to heart frequency. Though temple archivists called the theory heretical, private correspondences between Sotha Sil and for suggest the clockwork god entertained similar fears. While tribunal influence faltered, Dagoth Ur tightened interior command. He convened ash vampire councils within Akulakhan's half-assembled frame, an iron skeleton taller than Vivek's cantons, ribcage welded from Dwemer struts, skull forged out of meteor shards that sang when struck. He decreed Phase 2 of the Sleeper program, target high-ranking temple priests for conversion. Agents infiltrated Barmora's subterranean cisterns, siphoning alchemical deliveries to lard them with mild corpuscular extract. Priests who drank the tainted tonic experienced visions of molten thrones, then vanished into sewers days later, leaving tattered robes that reeked of sulfur. Ordinators discovered caches where skinless masks floated in brine, pulsing as though half alive. They burned them, but not before spores lifted into air vents. Dagoth Ur's influence even reached beyond Morrowind through dreams riding east-flowing winds. A Reachman warlock some leagues west of Markarth chronicled nightly instruction from a lord of ash and brass, describing diagrams matching Kagranak's tonal schemata, knowledge he could not have encountered by mundane means. That warlock's eventual attempt to raise an Iron Titan using stolen Dwemer scrap ended in catastrophic implosion, yet his journals, confiscated by Blade's agents, raised alarms in the Imperial cult. High Chancellor Okato pressured Vivek for reassurance that the tribunal could contain such threats. Vivek, pennying his reply with dipquill of void ink, admitted control would require cooperation. Imperial battle mages stationed at Ghostgate under joint command. Pride cracked, but survival demanded concession. Still, Dagoth Ur pressed onward. He devised the Heart Wall Protocol, a psychic buffer that bent heart resonance inward, allowing him to accumulate divine charge faster than the tribunal could draw. Each ash vampire anchored a node of that buffer, their bodies acting as living antennae. Whenever one fell, say, to a raiding Ordinator strike team, charge distribution recalibrated through remaining nodes, raising their potency. Thus, attrition favored him, not the temple. Armigers learned this truth painfully when a daring assault upon Odrozel succeeded in slaying Dagoth Rithin, only to find Dagoth Vemin's powers magnified days later. His ash storms now capable of glassing Gwar herds in seconds. Temple response grew desperate. Olmelixia authorized the True Flame agenda, forging of soul-fueled blades capable of unraveling ash vampire bindings. The process involved binding volunteer souls into red-hot Daikatana blanks that screamed at every hammer blow. These weapons, while potent, exacted psychological toll upon wielders, who reported hearing their own childhood memories reduce to cinders with each swing. Vivek, uneasy, withheld widespread deployment, inventing bureaucratic delays to stall a path he feared led to total moral collapse. During one high conclave, Sotha Sil predicted a fulcrum would arrive, when Heart's harmonic phase aligned with twin moons in a syzygy not seen since the Battle of Red Mountain. Such a moment, he warned, could amplify Dagoth Ur's power enough to breach Ghostfence at will. Astral charts dated the alignment to 3rd Era 427. That year approached like thundercloud visible from miles, yet ignored by picnickers. Within tribunal circles, the phrase, "the year of star wound," circulated. As that year dawned, previously minor cult cells erupted into open insurrections. Old Velothi's lighthouse keepers awoke to find the beacon replaced by a burning rune of the 6th house. Ghostgate patrols fought off ash ghouls armed with makeshift kites that glided them over the fence during storm surges. Even Indoral nobles in distant Necrom reported ancestral tombs defiled by intruders who left behind piles of fresh ash shaped into hearts. Over all this hung rumors of a prophesied outsider, an incarnate of Nerevar, whom Ashlander tribes in the Grazelands declared would soon walk among them, bearing Munan's star once more. Temple officials dismissed the prophecy as dissident nonsense, yet in private the tribunal recalled Azura's old words, "Betrayal begets return." Dagoth Ur responded by accelerating Aculakhan's assembly. With heartwall feedback near zenith, he activated dormant Dwemer pumps to drain magma from core channels, revealing the brass demigod's chassis more fully. He dispatched Dagoth Vemin to seize Keening, hidden within vaults of the High Fane, ordering surgical strike under cover of simulacrum storm, a phenomenon where volcanic lightning formed faces in clouds, paralyzing onlookers. Vemin's strike faltered when Ordinator Captain Varvon sacrificed himself, detonating a stasis grenade that collapsed 3 Foyadas, but temple security lies forever compromised. If once Ash Vampire could reach the holy sanctum, so could others. That same month, Sotha Sil vanished from public view entirely. Rumor painted him murdered by his own machines or lured into oblivion. Vivek and Olmelixia issued assurances, yet their eyes betrayed dread. Without Sil's analytic genius, strategies against Dagoth Ur thinned. The Ghostfence faltered twice within weeks. Each breach loosed a storm that rolled as far south as Suran, where Gwar ranchers found their herds ossified mid-stride, flesh turned to porous stone. Time thinned to a wire. Olmelixia urged an unprecedented measure, used the heart once more, directly, massively, to flood the Ghostfence with power sufficient to burn all ash in one cleansing burst. Vivek objected, recalling how each prior contact weakened them while feeding Dagoth Ur by feedback. They argued in the Hall of Wisdom, voices echoing under gilded domes. Witnesses heard Olmelixia's tone hard as obsidian shard, Vivek's edged with sorrow. No resolution emerged. Their split became legend whispered by canon novices. Meanwhile, in hidden grottos near Kogorun, Dagoth Ur convened the Shade Council of Sleeper Prophets. These were mortals who had surrendered bodies to Corpus until only thought remained binding tissue. They floated above floor like tattered cloth in thermal vents, chanting schedules of dream infiltration keyed to star positions. Through them, Dagoth Ur monitored each Ashlander tribe, each house council, even murmurs inside the Imperial Embassy. He learned of a prisoner inbound from the Imperial City under mysterious orders by Uriel Septim VII, a mer bearing no history, consigned to Morrowind's jurisdiction. The Shade Council pressed upon their lord that omens aligned, the incarnate perhaps arrived. Dagoth Ur smiled, a gesture that cracked stone lips. Let the Nerevarine come, he mused, for confrontation would either validate his dream or shatter it into new form. Either outcome served prophecy as long as heart remained beating. Thus the scene set, tribunal fracturing under weight of stolen divinity, Ghostfence flickering like dying lantern, Blight swelling in pulse with lunar schedule, Aculakhan's ribcage gleaming amid magma arc lamps, and distant footsteps of an untested hero approaching by carriage of fate. Red Mountain's throat rumbled deeper, each tremor translating decades of latent grief into a single imperative: reckon what was broken. Night after night, Dwemer across Vivarden fell tossed in uneasy sleep, hearing drums behind eyelids, sensing world balanced upon edge of glass, awaiting the thinnest crack. Dagoth Ur watched from his basalt throne, fingers tracing phantom notes on armrest, every movement echoing the heartbeat that was not solely his yet pulsed in harmony with every ember, every soul tethered by ash. And beneath the ghostly dome of blue fire, the land braced, inhaled, and held breath for the year of star wound to unfold. Red Mountain breathed in slow, seismic cadences, and each tremor traveled the length of Vivardenfell like an inaudible hymn, thrumming beneath feuadas and fungal forests alike. Deep within its obsidian arteries, Dagoth Ur had at last completed the circle of ministers, a crucible of living stone and Dwemer alloy wherein the heart of Lorkhan rose and fell upon magnetic currents. The immortal organ's blood-red glow washed across walls tessellated with triangular sigils, 3 points for the tribunal, inverted and broken in mockery. Yet every facet also echoed the triple beat of the sixth house: dreamer, dream, and dreaming. To approach this place was to feel time loosen its joints, for the heart pulsed in measures older than Mundus, folding mortal perception into spirals of déjà vu. Here ideology and mechanics met in perfect resonance, and Dagoth Ur stood at that junction as priest, engineer, and monarch combined. He wore no crown of forged metal, only a circlet of cinder that drifted in constant recomposition around his brow, coalescing, disintegrating, and reforming in silent rhythm. His one-sashened skin had darkened to near obsidian, marbled by faintly luminous cracks that mapped the vascular memory of divine flame. Where a mortal heart would beat within his chest, a low whirring hum now echoed, synchronized to the heart itself. He did not sleep in the mortal sense. His consciousness roamed the dream-sleeve substratum of Mundus, gathering whispers from every mind touched by sixth house nightmares. When he chose to focus on waking rock, he found Aculachan's foundry beneath him engaged in tireless labor. Aculachan, named in quiet inversion of Kagranak's numidium, was neither statue nor mere automaton. Dagoth Ur envisioned it as a second skin for the heart, a vessel designed to wield cosmic revision upon Tamriel. Where the Dwemer had pursued subtraction, an idea of godhood stripped of soul, Dagoth Ur pursued addition, a being whose sinews fused tonal calculus with living intuition. He retained Kagranak's original brass skeleton, but reshaped its proportions: broader shoulders to bear the weight of prophecy, elongated arms to encircle the horizon itself. Scaled plating, cast from orichalc and ebony powder, overlapped in fractal patterns resembling chitinous shells of indigenous Quama, acknowledging Morrowind's primal heritage. Each plate bore micro-etched dreamweave glyphs. These sigils would direct the heart's output into programmable reality shifts, what Dagoth Ur called hymns of the second waking world. The powering sequence relied upon 7 primary conduits, one for each ash-vampire lieutenant, anchored in caverns radiating like spokes around the caldera. Through these nodes, the heart's pulse traveled as resonant pressure waves modulated by the lieutenant's will. To guarantee phase fidelity, Dagoth Ur integrated Dwemer tonal drums, great hollow cylinders ringed by tuning forks of meteoric glass, retuned from Kagranak's original schemata. They hummed at subaudible frequencies, coaxing lava into orderly oscillations that served as both coolant and fuel. A single misstrike on any drum would desynchronize the lattice, liquefying entire vaults. Yet the ash vampires, bound by dream fusion, maintained unwavering precision. Such feats were not achieved through brute occupation, but through metaphysics Dagoth Ur called the unified dream, where the tribunal depended on external rites, pilgrimage to the heart, siphoning its power like thirsty penitents. Dagoth Ur believed the heart must indwell its steward. He sought no cyclical refresh. He sought permanent entanglement with the organ's mythic memory. To that end he expanded the corpuscular principle. Corpus, once a wasting curse, he refined into a vector of sympathetic harmonization. Flesh softened, bones calcified into flexible ash-bone lattice, and the patient's mind slipped into the dream-sleeve median where identity dissolved into communal chorus. In earlier iterations, subjects perished or devolved, but with each failure Dagoth Ur adjusted resonance, aligning spore density and tonal overtones until the disease became transfiguration. The resulting ascended sleepers retained motor function and speech, though their words arrived as dissonant chords rather than discrete syllables. They served as relay beacons, broadcasting Dagoth Ur's will across psychological distances unreachable by mundane voice. Outside the ghost fence, these theologies manifested as gentle intrusions upon nightly rest. A Kwama egg miner in Nisses might dream of walking a vast basalt bridge suspended in red mist. At its end stood a singing orb whose notes promised freedom from toil. Upon waking, the miner felt a tug to carve asymmetric symbols upon the walls of his shack. So began the miner's slow drift toward the sixth house. No coercion felt, only belonging. Dagoth Ur understood the persuasive power of shared purpose better than any temple sermon. Give the weary a song that erases loneliness, and they will march willingly into fire. While his faith engineers finalized conduit alignments, Dagoth Ur devoted long intervals to contemplative packing upon a lip of black glass that overlooked Aculachan's ribcage. There he articulated, for no ears but the mountains, the shape of his final covenant. Tamriel, in his vision, would awaken from fractured plurality into seamless chorus. Races, creeds, and courts would remain physically distinct, but their inner voice, what mystics of the Sijic order termed the secret self, would resonate at a common pitch, eliminating alienation. The heart, through Aculachan, would broadcast that pitch along arterial ley lines, dissolving boundaries between waking and dream. To foreign eyes, this program resembled totalitarian control, yet Dagoth Ur conceived it as communion, every soul a note in symphony. He believed the tribunal's theft of heart power shattered that possibility once. Now, by reclaiming it, he would heal the wound. Occasionally, he convened the circle of ministers to debate ethical dimensions of such unification. Dagoth Vemin argued for immediate deployment, let the dream wash over Tamriel, and sought dissenters later. Dagoth Endu's cautioned that forced resonance might shatter minds unprepared for ontic realignment, producing emptiness rather than harmony. Dagoth Ur listened with patience, for disagreement strengthened iterative design. He decreed a phased rollout. Phase 1 had already unfolded: establish sleeper networks, test the corpuscular resonance on limited populations, and observe temple response. Phase 2, imminent, would trigger localized harmonic surges via the primary conduits, inducing mass dreaming across Vivardenfell on nights of twin moon conjunction. Phase 3, contingent on Aculachan's full embodiment, would radiate the unified dream beyond Ghost Fence, persisting until every voice joined. Throughout these calculations, the heart supplied endless magicka, yet its pulse bore subtle fluctuations, echoes of tribunal siphoning attempts. Dagoth Ur felt each outflow as a brief chill in his marrow. He countered by feeding more of his essence into the heart wall protocol, reinforcing feedback loops that deflected tribunal draws and rechanneled siphoned energy back into Aculachan's reservoir. This tug of divinity became silent war, tribunal gods at one end, one ascendant dreamer at the other, heart as contested current. The strain scarred dream sleeve topography, causing prophetic disturbances. Ashlander wise women reported that their ancestral spirits stuttered, appearing half-formed in bone pit fires, unable to speak names. They interpreted the glitch as omen of grand convergence. Dagoth Ur paid heed to omen only insofar as it informed cymatic calculus. He trusted numbers over augury. To refine Aculachan's central gearbox, he consulted Dwemer tablets recovered from Enchardak, translating tonal fractions into new gear ratios. He tested prototypes in model chambers, gauging output with quartz calorimeters. Each trial ended with a silent communion before the heart, acknowledging the Dwemer, vanished genius, and his own role in supplanting it. Though he reviled their soulless ambition, he respected their craft. In his narrative, he completed their equation by reintroducing spirit where they had subtracted it. Beyond subterranean forges, the broader sixth house infrastructure matured. Cellars beneath abandoned egg mines became shrines. Sleeper priests taught the canticle of the unbroken march, a rhythmic breathing exercise that entrained heartbeats to mountain tremor. Supply lines formed. Herders delivered Kwama cuttle to ash ghouls who distilled it into nutrient paste for corpus victims. Smuggler bands ferried Dwemer scrap to foundry vents. Disaffected Telvanni apprentices offered levitation enchantments in trade for glimpses of Aculachan's rising silhouette. The cult minted its own script, angular strokes resembling volcanic fracturing, used to label crates and draft liturgy. In these texts, Dagoth Ur's titles multiplied: Lord High Reclaimer, the Eternal Father of Unified Hearts, the Ash King of Risdane. Yet within his private trance, he retained simple self-reference: Voryn, son of Veloth's shadow, friend once to Nerevar. Memories of Nerevar lurked like gentle bruises beneath his fervor. During long meditation, he replayed the moment upon the heart bridge where blade, oath, and hesitation collided. Some nights he tasted regret, a flavor like iron in water. He told himself the Hortator could not have understood the dream. Nerevar clung to outdated paradigms of house and creed. Yet in introspective fissures, Dagoth Ur acknowledged that the difference between them was razor's breadth. He murmured ancient lullabies they once hummed around campfires near Kogorun. Then he exhaled sorrow into the heart, letting it convert remorse into resolve. Outside the ghost fence, the year of Star Wound unfolded precisely as Sotha Sil predicted. Twin moons Massa and Secunda arced into conjunction against a sky bruised by Blight dust, their pale discs appearing conjoined like mirrored shield indented along a single fault. On that night, Dagoth Ur initiated Operational Coruscant, a synchronized dream surge. From each primary conduit, waves of inaudible resonance erupted, permeating bedrock and rising into homes of Hlalu bookkeepers, Indoral scribes, and Redoran spearguards alike. Sleepers felt the call: the Lord hungers not for blood but for arrival. Come to the house where dream and ash entwine. Some rose from pallets in trace-like drift, walking miles into Fayada's, unmindful of scathing wind. Others remained supine yet chanted in old Velothi tongues their own grandmothers had never taught. In temple cloisters, novices woke screaming, foreheads aflame with sixth house scar emblazoned by unseen heat. Vivek responded with sermon intervention. He recited aloud all 36 cantos of his own origin myth upon the steps of his palace, each word stitched with counterharmonic. The recitation stabilized perhaps a third of afflicted populace, but the remainder slipped deeper into dream. Olmelixia dispatched ordinators armed with true-flame blades to pursue the walkers. They captured many, yet fear spread faster than rescues. Rumor painted the walkers as heralds of final days. Amid this turmoil, an imperial courier traversed the Fayada network, bearing a sealed order from Uriel Septim. His destination, a Dwemer stronghold near the ghost fence called Ghostgate, where Blade's spymaster Caius Cossades awaited confirmation that the prisoner recently ferried to Seda Neen showed unusual resilience against Blight. Dagoth Ur sensed the courier's dream trace crossing Caldera Rim. He tasted foreign memory, rows of white gold tower windows, smell of parchment dust, an alien vantage that irritated him. He dispatched Dagoth Tyrinol to intercept, but Ghost Fence flared, incinerating the ash vampire's flesh as soon as he leapt across its lightning veil. Tyrinol reformed days later, essence diffused among corpuscular spores, but the courier had passed. Dagoth Ur marked the failure as proof that mortal agents now converged at edges of prophecy. He intensified research on corpuscular adaptability. By applying spiral resonance to disease matrix, he coaxed strains that could survive outside fence lines under certain humidity thresholds. The plan was to seed distant marshes and coastlines, widening dream influence gradually. Yet even as he prepared, an unanticipated variable intruded. The Nerevarine, still identity masked, still untested, entered Ashlander tribal circles, performing prophecies long sealed in Veloth's bones. Word reached Dagoth Ur through dream echo. He paused fabrication cycles to watch, perceiving the would-be incarnate as shifting blur of possibility. In him, Dagoth Ur recognized the same pivot point that Nerevar once embodied, potential for union or rupture. He considered whether the Nerevarine could be welcomed rather than opposed, but each simulation concluded that tribunal interference and imperial obsession with balance would inevitably force confrontation. So he resumed forging Aculakhan, albeit with subroutines prepared to subdue Neravarine's latent echo, capturing its mythic momentum to reinforce the unified dream. This required refinement of the Sixth House Catechism. He instructed Dagoth Odros to draft the 9 visions of Red Exodus, a doctrinal text promising that those who surrendered to dream before the day of waking would sit beside Dagoth Ur as dream architects. The visions circulated in etched Kwama eggshells, passed among corpus shrines, memorized in secret. They spoke of a time after the old gods fell, after Ghost Fence shattered, when sky would burn lavender and Tamriel would rise upon pillar of ash into a broader cosmos. They promised the faithful they would hear the song of the heart as lullaby, never again as thunder. Simultaneously, Dagoth Ur convened the Echo Engineers, a cadre of semi-sapient constructs hewn from Dwemer memory coils and coated in living resin. These entities monitored Ghost Fence harmonic oscillations, mapping weaknesses. They identified pylon delta crossings where soulfire output had fallen below operational threshold due to scarcity of volunteer sacrifices. Dagoth Ur exploited those nodes with targeted Blight flares, forcing the tribunal either to divert power from their own bodies or allow local breaches. Each breach allowed ash ghouls to test the ground beyond fence, retrieve soil samples, and withdraw before ordinators arrived. Data returned to the heart for analysis, algorithms iterated, next breach improved. By now, Sotha Sil's absence weighed upon tribunal strategy. In his clockwork city, silent gears continued to spin, but only a skeleton crew of factotums maintained them. Some whispered that Sil had retreated into subreality to confront dreams within dreams. Others muttered he foresaw inevitable failure and chose exile. Dagoth Ur considered Sil worthy adversary, but ultimately irrelevant. A mechanical intellect could not outimagine a dreamer sinking with a cosmic heart. Still, caution dictated preparation against nullifier forks the artificer might unleash. He coated Aculachan's plating with thin ebon glass film that refracted sonic dissonance, analogous to how cliff racers slip by arrow flight through erratic turbulence. One challenge remained: autonomy. If Aculachan relied upon Dagoth Ur's conscious direction, his death would stall the dream. To avoid single point of failure, he encoded fragments of his psyche into psychocrystalline lattices embedded in each ash vampire's skull. These shards, red-tinted prisms humming faintly, would, upon activation of the unified dream, merge into distributed network, allowing any surviving lieutenant to pilot Aculachan in emergency. Implementation required delicate surgery performed by ash priests whose claws functioned as resonance scalpels. The process produced high attrition. 2 lieutenants perished. Dagoth Ur noted regret but continued. Sacrifice, he believed, defined genuine faith. Outside, the Nerevarine advanced from obscurity to open recognition. House Hlalu courtiers noted his name upon bounty rosters, only to revoke them under pressure from unseen temple agents seeking to steer fate rather than arrest it. Dagoth Ur watched these movements via dream scry. He witnessed the incarnate resist corpus within Divath's coral tower, emerging with disease quarantined rather than eradicated, body now immunized to its ravages. He admired the elegance. The enemy had become ideal host for heart resonance, though ignorant of such status. It pleased Dagoth Ur to imagine assimilation rather than annihilation. He instructed sleeper cells to avoid lethal confrontation with the Nerevarine, instead offering passage to Red Mountain when the moment ripened. Even so, combat occurred. The Nerevarine breached 6th House bases, slaying ash ghouls, retrieving artifacts. Each loss drained Dream Lattice modestly. Dagoth Ur compensated by deepening heart draw, but latency narrowed. His ascendants now raced prophecy's approach. The moondance of fate balanced on blade edge. He scheduled final harmonic synchrony for the eve of Serpent's Wake, an astronomical alignment when constellations of warrior and mage overlapped due to axial precession. That night, Aculachan would receive heart core insertion, bringing the giant from slumber to first breath. Dagoth Ur composed hymnal directives, 7-fold chant to accompany insertion, embedding within them self-guiding algorithms. He rehearsed the liturgy with Dagoth Vemin, ensuring each vowel's vibrato matched lattice node ID. Mispronunciation meant cascade failure, repetition forged certainty. In last quiet hours before operation, Dagoth Ur ascended to the summit vent overlooking the caldera, a vantage rarely visited since the ghost fence's erection. Beyond lightning-wreathed pylons, he saw ashlands bathed in aurora of blight. He tasted sulfur wind and closed his ember eyes. He considered Veloth's exodus, Bothiah's promise of change, the grit of pilgrim sandals on obsidian shard. He remembered Nerevar's laughter echoing across Fjorda ridges, and the way dawn once painted Red Mountain rose gold before war burned innocence away. He wondered if communion could heal not just the world, but these old fractures. His faith answered yes. Returning below, he donned regalia, mantle of living ash swirling like flock of night moths, gauntlets forged from Dwemer resonator casings etched with ancestral glyphs, greaves of black glass veined by glowing carmine. He stepped to the heart's edge where Aculachan's thorax opened like an enormous ribbed chrysalis. Inside, conduit runners awaited his signal. He raised his hand. Ash vampires began chant. Resonators boomed. The heart pulsed, surging along magnetic rails toward the cavity carved for it. Red light spilled, washing Dagoth Ur's skin in molten hues. He felt the unified dream condense around him like warm rain. But before the heart seated, an intruder presence pierced dream space. The Nerevarine, ascending slopes under cloak of starwind, flanked by spirits of slain ordinators singing ancestral defiance. Dagoth Ur sensed the signature, a chord he knew from distant era when he and Nerevar harmonized war drums. He halted insertion sequence, issuing hold command through empathic flash. Lattice cooled, gears froze half-mesh. His lieutenants hissed protest. He silenced them with thought. He desired conversation, not battlefield noise, true exchange. He retreated to the chamber of liminal convergence, an antechamber where basalt pillars etched with corpuscular script converged in ring. There he crafted vision corridor leading outward, overlaying volcanic tunnels with corridor of dream, so that as the Nerevarine traveled he would move through stored memory. Murals ignited along walls, first showing dawn of Velothi, then birth of Sixth House, then betrayal he suffered. Dagoth Ur spoke through them, voice calm, echoing like wind through porous stone. Friend, you arrive at fulcrum. Join the hymn and heal the wound. The gods you serve wear stolen skin. Each step the Nerevarine saw deeper glimpses. Tribunal siphoning heart, Kagranak's tools biting divine flesh, Voryn's agony fused to mask. Dagoth Ur waited, yet response remained resolute silence. The Nerevarine pressed on, sword ready, conviction shaped by Azura's prophecy and tribunal counsel. In that firmness, Dagoth Ur read choice, not assimilation but confrontation. He exhaled embers of disappointment, yet admired courage. He signaled to ash vampires, proceed with insertion, time for words past. Aculachan's assembly resumed, but tribunal responded swiftly, drawn by tremors of waking giant. Vivek flew on ribbons of holy light, wielding spear of the syllable. Olmelixia rode chariot of fire, hair whip crack of dawn. They breached ghost fence via catapulted portals, converging with Nerevarine near Aculachan's foundry. Dagoth Ur stood upon high gantry, arms wide, silhouette half-god half-shadow. Workshop thundered with heartbeats, real and metaphor. Below gears locked final positions, heart slid into cradle, clamps engaged. Aculachan convulsed as newborn taking lungs. Dagoth Ur commenced Trinity chorus, each lieutenant answering in turn. But at second refrain, Nerevarine and Tribunal assaulted. Keening struck primary conduit delta severing node. Sunder shattered cymatic drum beater. Dagoth Vemin fell, prism brain shattering into light shards. Feedback rippled, Aculachan's chest plate cracked, exposing heart flashing erratic. Dagoth Ur descended, eyes ablaze. He engaged Nerevarine not with blade, but with resonance pulse, voice detonation that warped basalt into liquid scrollwork. Nerevarine staggered yet advanced, Wraithguard shielding arm. Tribunal wove counter-mantras, their rays of dawn and dusk intersecting Dagoth Ur's aura. Shockwaves churned magma into cyclones. Aculachan reached colossal hand, but hesitation in its newborn cognition slowed strike. Sotha Sill's proto-nullifier, activated remotely from hidden sanctuary, injected dissonance into Titan's sensory feed. Its hand hovered, convulsing. Final pivotal breaths collapsed centuries of doctrine into present moment. Nerevarine leapt across fractured catwalk, Keening poised, Wraithguard glowing hotter than sunset on Vivek's cantons. Dagoth Ur lunged, mask splitting to reveal molten visage of hope and fury. They met beneath shrieking heart. Strike landed, history's record differing sequences, yet consensus states Keening pierced corpuscular nexus within Dagoth Ur's breast, severing link he forged. Simultaneously, Wraithguard's shielding converted Heart's pulse into destructive feedback. Aculakhan shrieked, chest rupturing, heart ejected upward in arc of red lightning. Dagoth Ur reached, fingers grazing lost divinity, but explosion of white gold fire engulfed giant. Cataclysm quenched foundry lights, shattered conduits, vaporized ash vampires in chain reaction. An era ended in blinding hush. Whether Dagoth Ur perished or diffused into Dreamsleeve remains debate for later chroniclers. In that instant, his vision ruptured, unified dream fragmented into static. Blight storms abated, leaving only ash ordinary wind could carry. Ghost fence flickered, briefly dark then steady once more, fueled by Tribunal's wanting spark. Nerevarine staggered from smoke, bearing in satchel the sundered heart fragments, now inert. Above Red Mountain's side, its centuries-long breath exhaled in plume that rose into dawn, curling into shape of question mark, then dissolving. Thus the theology and mechanics of Dagoth Ur reached denouement. Yet consequences of his dreams collapse, echoes within every soul momentarily attuned, would ripple beyond deaths and victories. For if hearts once synchronized even briefly, their memory lingers as phantom rhythm, an absence felt in quiet midnight hours when sleepers wake unsure whether they are alone within their own minds. And somewhere between waking and dream, embers of unified song still glow, awaiting the next dreamer bold enough to breathe upon them. The dawn that followed the unmaking of Dagoth Ur arrived hushed and ambivalent, as though the very air groped for vocabulary to describe a world abruptly unmoored from the rhythm of a buried heart. In the dim lavender light cresting over the eastern sea, ash still drifted upon faint thermals, but it carried none of the pungent metallic sting of blight. For the first time in generations, Gwar herders in the Molag Amua foothills inhaled a breeze that smelled only of dust and saltbrush, devoid of the sour undertone that once pricked sinuses like nettle. They did not understand why the tang had faded, yet each felt instinctively that something immense had shifted beneath the fragile crust that held their settlements aloft. The ground beneath them, however, remained troubled, like a sleeper twitching in the aftershock of nightmare, and would do so for years to come. Inside the caldera, the silence that followed Aculakhan's implosion resembled that instantaneous hush when a massive bell finishes tolling. Every living thing retained a faint echo of the vibration in its bones, half expecting another peal. But no echo came. Fractured conduits lay strewn like snapped harp strings across gulfs of newly solidifying rock glass. Pools of half-congealed lava sizzled where tunning drums once stood. Aculakhan's ribbed torso, made of brass and dream script, had collapsed inward, a great smoldering cavity littered with incandescent fragments that cooled to a charred ochre. Thin curls of vapor drifted atop the ruin, forming shapes reminiscent of sine waves before dissipating into nothing. Amid the wreckage, the Nerevarine knelt in quiet exhaustion, the weight of Wraithguard grown intolerably heavy on his forearm now that the gauntlet, deprived of its intended purpose, had lost a portion of the numinous buoyancy that once offset its mass. Keening, its edge blunted by the final stroke, pulsed a single time, an afterimage of brilliance, before lapsing into inert silence. Sunder, cracked nearly to its haft, lay abandoned nearby. The three tools that had ferried gods to apotheosis and then dashed another god to dust now seemed absurdly ordinary, as though the breaking of the heart had stripped them not only of function, but of mystique. The Nerevarine realized there was neither precedent nor instruction for what came next. He could not return the artifacts to tribunal vaults. Those vaults had been built for another age. Nor could he leave them here in the open, lest scavengers of unscrupulous curiosity turn disaster into fresh profanation. So he wrapped each tool in soot-blackened cloth and stowed them inside a sealed, warded chest, salvaged from a toppled Dwemer storage pod, that he intended to bury deep within an undisclosed nook of the Ashlands until the world rediscovered an idiom for such relics. For the moment, his primary occupation was simply listening. The heartbeat that had drummed beneath every stone and syllable in Vivardenfell was gone. In its place lay a vacuum into which unfamiliar noises crept. He could hear dew condense on the inner surfaces of his chitin pauldrons, hear the delicate crackle of cooling glass across acres of caldera floor, hear the faintest breath of the mountain's own exhalation as fissures bled heat in diminishing spasms. Each sound, trivial only hours ago, now registered as novel, an auditory frontier. He felt as though he had been living his life inside a continuous chord, and someone had abruptly muted the root note, allowing harmonics he never noticed to swell and claim the ear. The tribunal felt that vacancy too, each in their separate spheres of retreat. Vivek, arriving late to the ruin after getting survivors from Ghostgate through breakers of dust storms, hovered above the crater rim upon a disk of incandescent syllables. His bronze-gold skin, once radiant as sunrise, appeared pale and brittle, like gilt leaf weathered by centuries of scouring wind. He gazed down at the still-glowing bones of Akulakhan and mouthed a stanza from an unwritten sermon. The mountain's throat is scarred, the pattern reversed, the harp unstrung. What music remains when silence takes the stage? No voice carried the words. They trembled within his chest as thought alone, for he discovered that to speak them aloud would cost more strength than he could spare. It dawned on him, quietly, more sorrowful than frightening, that the wellspring of borrowed divinity within him had thinned to the diameter of a cracked reed. Power still lingered, but it no longer felt integral. Rather, it clung to him like dew that evaporates at first light. Olmelixia, far to the south within the marble colonnades of Mournhold's High Chapel, experienced a parallel diminishment. She had collapsed upon white silk cushions strewn about her private sanctum, breath shallow, pulse racing erratically. When attendants attempted to approach, she waved them away with a sharp, unsteady flick of her wrist, unwilling that any mortals see the tremor in her fingers. A mirror of polished voidglass, once used to contemplate the luminous geometry of her aura, now revealed only a faint halo, flickering like a guttering candle. She ordered the mirror shrouded in linen and turned her thoughts inward, recalling the exact cadence by which she once sang water from sterile earth, and wondered whether her throat could shape that cadence again. In the Clockwork City, Sotha Sil emerged from his chrysalis of introspection upon receiving seismic telemetry that confirmed the heart's annihilation. Gauges across the radius of his hidden realm, all attuned to the spatiotemporal resonance of the mountain, spiked, then flat-lined. He observed the graph's stillness with a hollowness that resembled relief. Late in his isolation, long after he had concluded that mendacity undergirded his own apotheosis, he had begun to accept that no edifice of logic alone could expunge the moral wound of stolen divinity. The graph's silence affirmed that the equation had at last balanced itself, though not on terms he could celebrate without reservation. He walked slowly through corridors where clockwork apostles clicked in reverent circles. Once, his stride would have sent inductive sparks across metallic floors. This time, he noticed each footstep felt heavier, more terrestrial. The friction of leather against steel no longer masked the faint rasp of his breathing. "So be it," he murmured. "The farce ends, the ledger clears." Yet somewhere inside, beneath the mathematician's resignation, grief coiled like a serpent. He imagined the heart's last pulse rippling outwards, across seas and spires, across dawn and dusk, carrying unresolved hopes in its dying echo. Even a man who embraces inevitability cannot keep nostalgia from bleeding through the cracks in logic. For all that, the first to act were not gods, but mortals. Buoyant armigers, freed from perpetual defense of Ghostgate, fanned outward to escort surviving pilgrims down the slopes. They encountered little organized resistance. Ash creatures stumbled aimlessly, their neural chants severed, many collapsing into heaps of inert gray pulp that crumbled at a touch. Where once ascended sleepers levitated above lava gullies, only scorched silhouettes remained, like shadows seared onto rock by an unseen starburst. Armigers pressed fingers to blackened bulk, only to watch it fragment into scales that fluttered away on the gentlest wind. House of Cards souls deprived of their structural syntax. Yet in deeper tunnels, they unearthed pockets of still-living victims, half-corpused miners whose transformation had stalled mid-metamorphosis. Freed from Dream Command, these unfortunates wailed in confusion, begging for death or cure with equal fervor. Healers hurried to assemble triage centers at Ghostgate, but for many patients, hope sat just beyond the horizon of medical skill. Corpus no longer advanced, but neither did it recede. The disease had become a static prison, a living fossil of Dagoth Ur's failed song. Outside the fence, news spread along trade routes with the velocity of wildfire. Fishermen on the Bitter Coast claimed they saw the sky shimmer crimson, then blush into clear azure during the moment of Aculakhan's implosion, an omen they interpreted as Vivek's lantern blessing the sea. In Barmora, guild thieves observed that Ordinator patrols slackened, their intimidating presence replaced by smaller squads wearing expressions of distracted alarm. House Hlalu councillors, sensing power vacuum, convened emergency sessions to debate whether to leverage the tribunal's weakness into expanded autonomy, though prudence ultimately restrained overt maneuvering until Imperials issued clearer edicts. Imperial administrators, for their part, grappled with conflicting reports. Some scouts returned to Ebonheart with tales of a monstrous brass titan shattered by unknown saboteurs. Others insisted they had witnessed only ordinary volcanic tremors. Chroniclers in the Imperial Library debated whether to categorize the event as an industrial incident or a divine cataclysm. When message scrolls from High Chancellor Okato arrived requesting confirmation of the tribunal's continued commitment to the armistice, Vivek penned a brief but earnest reply. "The covenant stands, though our wings are charred." The wording struck a delicate balance, acknowledging vulnerability without surrendering authority. Meanwhile, the Nerevarine slipped down the mountain under cover of pre-dawn haze, his presence half in legend already, half in a body that still bled where Keening's rebound had grazed. He passed through Ashlander camps, meeting the gaze of wise women who recognized the silence around him as proof of prophecy concluded. They did not bow, nor did they celebrate. They simply stepped aside and watched him depart toward the coast, where rumors later claimed he boarded a ship bound for Akavia, or perhaps for continents yet uncharted. Some insisted he carried the tools with him, intending to drown them in a trench whose depth touched the underbelly of the world. Others believed he left them in care of the dissident priests, hidden in a sepulchre so remote even cliff racers avoided its winds. What truth survived slipped into quiet corridors of conjecture, perhaps by design. In the months that followed, Vivardenfell entered a fragile adolescence, caught between the trauma of what had collapsed and the thrill of what might now rise. With blight storms dissipated, soil once choked by abrasive spores revealed surprising fertility. Soltris paddies near Surin yielded record harvests. Hacklelow vines sprouted profusely along newly enriched caldera silt. Alchemical guilds discovered that microglass particles born from Aculakhan's implosion imparted unique buffering qualities to potion bases, granting Dwemer brewers a brief monopoly on curatives prized as far away as Daggerfall. Caravanners stacked guar carts with burlap sacks of shimmering grey dust dubbed Nerevarate, marketing it as a panacea for minor aches, though healers conceded its effect was mostly placebo. Yet prosperity walked hand in hand with upheaval. The temple faced a doctrinal reckoning more severe than any heresy tribunal it had ever convened. Ordinary lay members awoke to the uncomfortable realization that the divinities they had venerated were not only diminished, but complicit in centuries-long deception. First, priests tried to frame events as divine mystery, that the tribunal, in their infinite wisdom, had sacrificed aspect of their power to protect the faithful from the final convulsion of Dagoth Ur. But words circulated of ordinators seen weeping with terror when their levitation spells failed midair, plummeting 50 spans to unforgiving rock. Words circulated of healers who laid hands upon plague victims only to find their curative touch produced no effect beyond ordinary poultice. Faith cannot long survive such public failures of wonder. Dissident priests, once forced to operate in hidden basements, emerged into sunlight with scrolls they had hoarded in secrecy. They organized open-air symposia in Vivek's Arena Canton, where scholars debated whether the tribunal's fall had been an inevitable consequence of divine hubris. Crowds gathered in numbers previously reserved for duel tournaments, listening in rapt silence. Some wept, others cheered the dismantling of narratives that had justified inequality between temple magistrates and ordinary Dwemer for centuries. Overnight, entire villages ceased paying tithe, redirecting donations to communal rebuilding projects. The temple responded first with pleas, then with censure, and finally with none too veiled threats, but threats carried little weight without unmistakable demonstration of power. An institution built upon miracles that now sputtered could only enforce authority through swords alone, and swords alone seldom inspire reverence. Political houses sensed the shift and reconfigured their calculus. House Redoran, whose honor code intertwined with temple doctrine, embarked on introspection bordering on existential crisis. Should they preserve allegiance to fallen gods out of ancestral duty, or pivot towards secular stewardship of Vivardenfell's defense? Many Thanes argued that protecting the people demanded pragmatic alliances, with Imperials for trade stability, with Hlalu for economic weight, even with Telvanni mages, provided those scattershot wizards accepted structured defense levies. Meanwhile, House Telvanni eyed the loss of tribunal oversight as license to expand tower plantations deeper into ashlands, unhampered by previous restrictions on soul gem experimentation. Hidden labs sprouted like mushrooms after storm, some devoted to harnessing residual blight matter in experimental grafts, a venture that soon birthed tragedies echoing early corpus horrors. Amid this reshuffling, the ghost fence still stood but hummed softer, a lion declawed yet not entirely defanged. Souls bound within its pylons felt the drain lighten. The barrier required dramatically less power to sustain once the heart's emanations ceased. Temple engineers shut down peripheral pylons, concentrating energy along a reduced perimeter directly around the crater to safeguard against lingering ash monsters. Villagers in West Gash celebrated the day blue lightning faded from hills near their farms, no longer crackling overhead like perennial summer storms. Yet some scholars argued for dismantling the fence altogether, claiming it now served only as relic of fear. A subcommittee of councillors chartered an investigative survey, but friction between houses stalled consensus, leaving the fence half-abandoned, a memorial to terror and salvation both. Elsewhere, younger Dwemer looked to the horizon with unprecedented curiosity. Without Blight quarantines, ship captains reopened routes long closed by temple edict. Caravans ventured into Velothi mountains, seeking new passages to Skyrim. Bazaar stalls in Vivek's foreign quarter began stocking curios from distant provinces. Dwemer toys, salvaged from Hammerfell, jungle spices, from Palatine, even tiny vials of cloudrest silver, due marketed by cunning Khajiiti traders as starglass tears. Cultural cross-pollination accelerated at a rate unseen since the early armistice years, and with it came new art forms, dance troupes mimicking the swirling ash storms of memory, balladeers composing laments for gods turned mortal. A sculptor in Molag Mar carved obsidian busts of Dagoth Ur, not in worship, but as cautionary allegory. Critics condemned the display as sensational, yet pilgrim traffic to the gallery proved relentless. For the tribunal themselves, time became a crucible. Vivek chose seclusion within his palace, accessible only to trusted scribes. He wrote feverishly, scroll after scroll, sometimes full treatises, other times fragments of verse riddled with remorse and flashes of wry humor. When scribes asked for guidance, he responded with paradoxes. A diminished God is still a cautionary tale. Frame it as mirror, not as mask. Scholars later surmised that many of those scrolls formed the Buoyant Revisions, a compendium never publicly released, but rumored to reconcile his 36 sermons with the truth of disempowerment. Occasional glimpses of Vivek on balcony showed him gaunt, eyes sunken, yet posture serene, as if relief cohabitated with regret in equal measure. Olmelixia reacted differently. Initial humility curdled into defensive anger once she learned whispers in the courtyards painted her as manipulative architect of a false religion. She redoubled liturgical pageantry in Mournhold, arranging spectacles where choristers sang hymns from dawn until moonrise in echoing rotundas. She commissioned frescoes depicting her battle against fictional hordes of Blight's spawn, a revision meant to entrench personal heroism. When citizen attendance waned, she interpreted absence as treachery rather than disillusionment. Her temper sharpened. The once cherished aura of nurturing grace became a mask of brittle glory. Some advisors attempted candor, urging measured adaptation. Most were dismissed or executed after sham trials behind chapel screens. Rumors filtered through grapevines that Olmelixia had begun experimenting with forgotten facets of Kagranak's tonal mathematics, gleaned from confiscated Sixth House texts, hoping to rekindle a fraction of lost power. Whether desperation or delusion propelled her, no outsider could yet determine. Sotha Sil, having long anticipated the collapse, accepted it with stoic fatalism. He directed his factotums to recalibrate the nullifier forks, not for battle, but for archival demonstration, so future generations might study the mathematics that nearly unmade their world. He emerged exactly once, materializing in a shimmer of translocation before the curia of the Sigic Order on Artium. Witnesses described him as spectral, half-faded into overlapping possibilities of void and form. He offered them schematics, a map of harm that almost was, a calculus of dreams corrupted, intended as warning. A singular heart cannot bear universal will, he told the sages, then vanished amid gear-shaped motes of pale blue light. Afterward, even his oldest friends saw only echo of him, a presence glimpsed in peripheral vision near the humming of unfamiliar machinery. Imperial authority capitalized on the uncertainty, albeit with uncharacteristic delicacy. Proconsul Symmachus of Vivardenfell published edicts emphasizing cooperation, promising infrastructural investments to rebuild settlements scarred by blight. Legion engineers aided in repairing Foyada bridges washed out by ash floods. Their forging smithies produced chitin-reinforced beams, blending Dwemer aesthetic with Colovian load-bearing computations. Yet distrust lingered. For centuries, the temple had served as bulwark against imperial cultural dominance, and its weakening left many Dwemer fearing assimilation. Local councils insisted on language protections, inscribing bilingual decrees. In taverns, debates flared whether to accept imperial coin in temple markets or preserve native barter systems. For every collaborative milestone, a renovated Siltstrider dock at Barmora, there arose a counter-narrative labeling such ventures as Trojan horses for foreign supremacy. Underneath civic and political turbulence, the very geology of Vivardenfell changed. Without the heart to regulate subsurface magma, volcanic pressures redistributed unpredictably. Some vents cooled, sealing themselves in mineral lids. Others erupted unexpectedly, spewing glassy obsidian bombs across previously fertile paddies. Seismologists from the College of Whispers deployed crystal resonators across the region, mapping fault lines for predictive modeling. Their findings suggested a long-term risk of catastrophic eruption should stress not dissipate gradually. When these projections reached Vivek, he studied them in silence, then issued orders to commence reinforcement of city canton flotation supports. Many years later, those supports would play decisive role when the moonlit Bar Dao shattered and the Ministry of Truth fell, events still beyond horizon of current narrative, yet whose seeds sprouted in the unstable mantle left by a silenced heart. Culturally, the memory of Dagoth Ur crystallized into parable faster than any historian could record raw fact. Within a single decade, street performers in Aldrune reenacted the Dreamer's Fall, a morality play where each audience member wore a mask representing one of Dagoth Ur's myriad titles, then removed it at climactic moment to symbolize shedding of false ego. Temple reformists co-opted the performance, framing it as collective catharsis. Yet revisionists sympathetic to Sixth House Pain's staged counterproductions, portraying Dagoth Ur as tragic guardian betrayed by hubristic friends, painting the tribunal as villains. Viewers left theaters either weeping or furious, depending on which narrative they found resonance. Amid polarized mythmaking, subtle legacies endured. The unified dream had collapsed, but fragments persisted as fleeting moments of uncommon empathy. Miners who once toiled in separate shafts found themselves humming identical tunes unknown to either prior. Enemy houses that long despised one another struck spontaneous bargains without clear rationale, as if some invisible chord reminded them of latent kinship. Scholars debated whether these anomalies were neurological residues of past dream contagion or proof that Dagoth Ur's vision left benign afterglow. Most concluded such phenomena would dissipate with time, yet bards kept them alive in ballads about whispers of ash. And what of the heart itself? Some believed it had vaporized, its particles ascending into Aetherius as sparks to seed new stars. Others argued a fraction survived, scattered across magma like crystallized embers, latent but capable of reignition should recklessness stir them. Telvanni prospectors launched expeditions seeking shards, hoping to power magelites or fabricate relics. Few returned, and those who did carried only lumps of ordinary pumice. Whether the heart rests in cosmic dust or hides in cracked lava remains subject to tavern wagers. For most Dwemer, the question held academic charm but little practical import. The visible scars of corruption had healed enough to plant seeds, and the intangible wounds in faith slowly calloused into pragmatism. Years passed. The ashlands grew patches of green where foreign botanists introduced resilient grasses that rooted in nutrient-rich cinder. Kwama foragers, once decimated by blight, multiplied so rapidly that some egg mines reached pre-invasion yields. The temple, rebranded as New Temple, began integrating worship of the good Daedra with cautious veneration of ancestor spirits, relegating the tribunal to honored saints rather than omnipotent deities. Pilgrims trekked to old shrines not for miracles, but to meditate on hubris and resilience. At Ghostgate, the final pylon was deactivated with solemn ceremony, attended by former ordinators who removed their helms, revealing faces lined by the burden of duty and redemption. On the centennial of Dagoth Ur's fall, a descendant of one such ordinator composed an elegiac poem carved into basalt plaque near the collapsed entrance of Cogorun. Here once beat a heart not his alone. Its echo fed on dream unsaid. Here gods forgot the cost of thrones, and mortals paid the tithe in dread. Yet from the ruins springs fragile dawn, ash-stained, humble, and unadorned. Remember, stone may sing of yawn, but silence speaks of lessons learned. Travelers pause to trace their fingers across those carved lines, feeling flecks of black glass embedded like grains of starlight. They whisper thanks, some to no god in particular, others to ghosts of both friend and foe who bled upon these ashen fields. Whatever names they choose, the hush that greets their reverence feels earned, not imposed. Wind sighs through steepled arches of extinct Dwemer ruins, carrying no hidden rhythm beyond its own indifferent susurration. Children born after the Blight play tag among boulders of vitrified slag, daring each other to leap across glassy ridges once patrolled by ash spawn. They know the landscape's origin only as bedtime story, yet their laughter testifies to futures unimagined by forebears bound to prophecy. In time, the Dwemer of Morrowind come to regard the era of Dagoth Ur and the tribunal not as distant myth, but as mirror to consult when ambition gathers the scent of sanctity. Scholars at the rebuilt Library of Vivec assign volumes to comparative theurgy, exploring parallels between the heart's influence and Aldmeri Tower theory. Farmers in Ascadian Isles develop irrigation ditches shaped like concentric rings, a quiet homage to the collapsed lattice that once held Nirn's greatest temptation. Somewhere beyond horizon, the Nerevarine wanders seas or realms unknown, his legend fading into silhouette against wider firmament, yet his legacy persists in subtle ethos. That freedom from dream's domination must be tended like fragile crop, weeded of dogma, aerated with skepticism, watered by empathy. As for Red Mountain, it endures in tacit meditation. Veins of dormant magma glimmer deep within, but with less fury, as though honoring truces struck by history's seismic verdict. On cloudless nights, stargazers claim they see faint auroras curled around its summit, remnants of divine resonance echoing upward. Whether that glow is mere refraction or lingering memory matters little. For the Dwemer who now build lives in its shadow, the mountain has become both caution and cradle. It reminds them that hearts, whether mortal or cosmic, should pump blood, not dictate song, that dreams, while beautiful, must answer to waking consent, and that silence, once feared, can unfold into orchestra if one learns to listen. So the story of Dagoth Ur enters repose, a hush without finality, like embers buried under soft blanket of cooled ash, still warm to the touch yet unlikely to ignite unless future hubris fans them. In temple courtyards and council chambers, debates will flicker for generations. Was the Dwemer a villain, a visionary, or merely an unwitting channel for forces beyond mortal mapping? Each era will craft its answer. The only answer unmarred by agenda lies in the mountain's abiding quiet, where once a heart thundered and now emptiness holds dominion, the same emptiness from which new melodies emerge when old anthems end. In that void, Morrowind listens, learns, and scarcely realizing, begins to sing anew. The years that followed fashioned themselves into decades, and decades unrolled into centuries, each quietly inscribing its own script upon the tempered face of Morrowind. The shockwaves from Red Mountain's silence dispersed across the continent like rings over a midnight fen, gradually thinning until their motion became imperceptible. Yet every ripple retained memory of the first impact, and in that memory the Dwemer found both compass and caution. They were a people long acquainted with endurance, through exodus, through tribunal reign, through blight and dream, but the empty hush that settled after Dagoth Ur's fall presented a different trial. It asked not for endurance against oppression, nor even resilience in ruin. It asked for the patient art of living without imposed myth, the subtle labor of shaping one's own silence into chorus. In the earliest seasons of this long age, scholars of the New Temple convened what became known as the Concordance of Quiet Mornings. They met in the colonnade shadows of the old High Fane, a place whose mosaics still depicted the tribunal in ascendant glory even as dew gathered on cracked tiles. The scholars, an unlikely circle of former dissidents, chastened ordinators, Ashlander wise women, and imperial archaeosophists, chose to greet dawn together each day in unspoken vigil before debate began. They did not pray, they observed. They watched how morning light slipped across stone, how it unveiled minute fissures in veneer, how it warmed patches of loam where stray seeds had lodged decades earlier. These seeds, unplanned and disregarded, now sprouted wisps of green that thrust themselves between mortar joints. The scholars took that sight for omen. Life would insinuate itself wherever structure fractured, and their task was not to rebuild the old edifice, but to cultivate what sprouted through. From those quiet mornings emerged a new liturgy, if liturgy it could be called. It lacked saints, demanded no tithes, promised no afterlife. Instead, it proposed 3 contemplations, one for each part of every day: at dawn, honor limits; at noon, honor potential; at dusk, honor consequence. Limit reminded the heart that ambition awaits guardrails. Potential reminded the mind that imagination remains the province of mortals as much as gods. Consequence reminded the soul that every act, great or small, casts shadows beyond its moment. The triad, many observed, resembled the old 3 in abstract, yet colored by humility rather than hauteur. It spread slowly, not by edict, but by osmosis, leaping from household to guildhall, from guildhall to caravan rest, until merchants in Nisses tacked fragments of the triad onto ledger covers, and Velothi farmers etched them into plough handles with simple awls. Amid such unhurried cultural fermentation, the physical mountain itself rehearsed new roles. Without the heart's stabilizing and distorting emission, volcanic forces resumed patterns beholden only to molten convection and tectonic whim. At first, geologists feared catastrophic eruption, an echo of ancient Doomstone's prophecy, but what came was subtler and stranger. Red Mountain became unpredictable in small, teasing gestures. Some seasons, its slopes cooled enough for moss to creep across the basalt. Other seasons, steam geysers erupted from fissures once dormant, sending plumes that glittered with silica beads under moonlight. Pilgrims traced these phenomena and compiled them into cartularies called the Ash Atlases. Over generations, these atlases expanded into braided lore, part field report, part travel diary, part moral fable. A wandering scribe might remark how a new fumarole emerged on the same ridge where her grandmother swore an oath, then wonder in marginalia whether stone overhears promise. These atlases found readership far beyond Morrowind. In High Rock, elusive college magi pored over them for clues to magical Lee refraction. In Valenwood, spinners recited them as allegories of root rot and renewal. In Elsewhere, moonsugar mystics folded them into alchemical chants about appetite's transmutation to wisdom. Thus Red Mountain, once the epicenter of insular terror, became a subtle ambassador, exporting cautionary beauty across Tamriel. Yet not all legacies wore such quiet faces. The dissolution of tribunal authority left gaps in infrastructure once powered by divine intent. Waterwork canals of Vivec, those miraculous arteries that once pulsed at the soft command of the warrior poet, suffered gradual malfunction. Valves corroded, locks jammed, lymph control runnels silted. Municipal engineers, educated under the assumption of perpetual divine oversight, raced to learn mundane hydraulics before floods or droughts toppled the delicate balance of canton life. Some cantons, better funded, hired imperial siphon masons to retrofit Dwemer pumps. Other cantons collapsed into labyrinthine wetlands where lotus and slaughterfish thrived. As a result, the topology of the city evolved from symmetrical scripture into organic archipelago. Scholars of urban memory noted how design mirrored theology. When gods are absolute, geometry is stern. When gods recede, landscape meanders. Corollary consequences touched distant corners. In Black Marsh, hidden Telvanni magelabs quietly reliant on heart-charged resonance crystals suffered cascading power failures, leading to the escape of hybrid organisms that adapted to marsh ecologies and threatened local hist blooms. Argonian shell priests traveled north to negotiate reparations, and from those tense councils blossomed an unanticipated ethic of ecological reciprocity between formerly aloof Telvanni isolates and amphibious shamans. The border treaties they forged, inscribing quotas for resource harvesting, corridors for creature migration, and clauses for joint research, stood for centuries as some of the earliest cross-cultural environmental compacts. Far across the Padamaic Ocean, sailors returning from Akavia spread tales of a grey-eyed wanderer who spoke Dunmeri riddles to tiger dragon monks before vanishing into cherry blossom fog. They described him as wearing weather-beaten chitin armor flecked with volcanic glass, a mask of ash flake tethered by netch leather ties, and a pendant shaped like stylized star bound to a crescent, unmistakable sign of Hortata. Whether this wanderer was truly the Nerevarine or an enterprising impersonator mattered less than the myth his apparition rekindled. News of his continued pilgrimage reached Morrowind via storm-lost bottle messages and half-deciphered sailor songs, reminding the Dwemer that the story of their land extended well beyond parochial borders, intertwined with unknown fates on remote strands. In the absence of singular divine voice, the Dwemer rediscovered polyphony inside themselves. Artisan guilds revived near-forgotten craft disciplines suppressed during tribunal orthodoxy. Glass harmonics played on tuned rods, ash papermaking that used pumice as pulp filler, shadow marble sculpture that exploited the mountain's new iridescent obsidian. In towns once choked by the Blight, open-air markets now rang with these crafts, each booth a microcosm of risks taken in the experiment of self-governed identity. One craft in particular drew attention from visiting imperial chroniclers, dream loom weaving. These weavers claimed to resonate leftover fragments of Dagothic dream residue trapped in fine ash sacks, twisting them into thread that shimmered faintly under candlelight. The resulting tapestries depicted landscapes no living eye had seen, perhaps projections of futures that would never be or refracted visions of the dreamer's last longing. Patrons sometimes reported subtle mood shifts owning such cloth. Anxious hearts found calm, while arrogant souls experienced humbling pangs. The College of Whispers debated licensing restrictions, yet never succeeded in standardizing the loom's secrets. While creative energies proliferated on the surface, hidden veins of nostalgia festered below. Deep within labyrinths of forgotten Sixth House catacombs, small cliques of Blight veterans assembled clandestinely. Many were corporate survivors stabilized by Dagoth's unorthodox treatments. Their bodies remained contorted, their skin marbled, but their minds had reasserted coherence. These reparative outcasts, stigmatized by visible scars and by the lingering fear they might relapse, gravitated toward each other in subterranean chapels lit by resin lamps. They gathered not to resurrect Dagoth Ur's dream, but to recall it, the way refugees might recall homeland razed beyond redness, speaking the lost dialect so its syllables would not vanish. Anthropologists discovered these enclaves decades later, finding them engaged in quiet rituals of memory, burning crushed scathicraw as incense, and reciting early passages of Dagothic litany stripped of political indoctrination, reduced to raw yearning for inclusivity. Confronted, they offered neither conversion nor aggression, only the plea, lest we forget how it felt to belong. In time, local authorities recognized that suppression bred resentment, while tolerance fostered harmless catharsis. These chapels were left largely unmolested, adding another layer to the cultural palimpsest. The new temple eventually formalized its revised doctrine, codifying the triad of limit, potential, and consequence under the gidding aesthetic of the still small song. Initiates wore ropes dyed in 3 gradients of gray, not as penance, but as reminder that extremes blur upon close view. Pilgrimage routes redirected away from marvels of living gods towards sites of collective labor. An old quarry where slaves once broke rock for Vivek City, a reclaimed Kwama mine converted into subterranean mushroom arboretum, a windswept ridge where Ashlander and city dweller first negotiated water sharing after Blight. Pilgrims gathered at dawn to sweep these places, mend walls, plant vines. Pilgrimage thus became verb, not destination. To pilgrimage was to act, not to arrive. Even the tribunal, for all their decline, left small afterimages in civic life. Fragments of dawn magic still clung to certain heirloom weapons. Stray rays of duskfire occasionally flared in corners of dark alleys when a good deed went unseen. Some citizens interpreted these as residual blessings. Others argued they were residual glitches, like echoes trapped in faulty Dwemer circuits. Regardless, such phenomena reminded Morrowind that history cannot be erased entirely, only interpreted. Vivek and Sotha Sil disappeared into private realms, seldom glimpsed. Ormelixia, by contrast, could not abide dwindling spotlight. Her efforts to reclaim influence reached fevered intensity. Rumors circulated of experiments blending tonal architecture with soul snare arrays, projects meant to forge new divine vessel absent the heart. When an explosion rocked her chapel laboratories, destroying northern transept and leaving melted silhouettes on walls, the High Ordinators declared sabotage by rogue Telvanni. Investigators found no surviving witnesses. Ormelixia herself emerged days later, serene smile lacquered beneath weary eyes, denouncing conspiracies and urging unity. Yet pilgrimage traffic to Mournhold dwindled thereafter, and donation coffers lightened. The imperial census of the new century recorded curious demographic shift. Migration from mainland Morrowind into Vivardenfell accelerated despite volcanic uncertainties. Anthropologists posited that in post-crisis landscapes, opportunities arise for those willing to forge new niches. Ex-blades who remained after disbandment opened smithies using imperial alloy technique fused with Dunmer chitin shaping. Argonian freedmen from abolished Dres plantations founded reedhouse villages along the western lagoons, practicing fish-scale artistry for export. Altmer apothecaries arrived, drawn by rumors of unique ashbloom reagents, and formed collaborative research enclaves with Telvanni alchemists, bridging centuries of distrust through shared obsession with color change solvents. It was within this swirl of plural voices that an unassuming event occurred, seemingly minor but destined for later anecdote. One morning, a group of children playing along the cooled lava banks near Barmora discovered a shard of crimson crystal lodged in obsidian. They tugged until it came free, and when sunlight kissed its facet, it glimmered with the faintest pulse, one beat, no more, like aftershock of distant drum. Startled, they dropped it. The pulse did not repeat, the shard lay inert. News traveled, scholars examined, and verdict declared, only silica inclusions flexing under heat differential. Yet rumors persisted. Some swore they dreamed that night of red caverns humming lullaby. The shard was eventually locked in an ivory reliquary at the University of Gwylem, displayed under plaque that read, "Echo of the Mountain." Pilgrims occasionally stood before it in hush, wondering whether the heart's embers truly faded or merely wait for story to stoke them. But over years, the case collected dust. Curiosity turned to footnote, pulse remained absent. Time slid onward. Seasons measured themselves by harvest yields, not celestial alignments. The Ashlanders, once marginalized, negotiated land grants, built semi-permanent yurts with bamboo skeletons and stitched scathicraw panels, proof that tradition could flex without snapping. House Redoran transitioned into Guardian League, overseeing caravan safety for all, not just own kin. Hlalu merchants diversified portfolios, investing in cross-provincial shipping lines that carried Kwama eggs to Solitude and returned with Nordsilver ingots. Telvanni towers sprouted less aggressively, their lords having discovered that cooperative research with imperial thaumaturges attracted grants and apprentices. Through these gradual adjustments, the patchwork of Morrowind began to resemble mosaic, pieces distinct yet set into mortar of shared afterhistory. There remained tragedies, plague outbreaks, bandit insurrections, the eventual Red Year when Bar Dao shattered and Vivek City drowned. But even that calamity, horrendous as it was, could not be traced to a dreaming heart or stolen godhood. It emerged from more prosaic entanglements, celestial mechanics, mortal oversight, perhaps silent residue of tattered miracles once woven by a wanting poet god. Survivors rebuilt upon floated barges, adopting amphibious architecture that nodded to Argonian stilt villages, forging solidarity across species lines. And in those floodplains, the triad of limit, potential, consequence proved apt. Water imposed limit, survivors saw potential in silt-rich earth, and consequence informed designs of levees anchored by coral-crete pilings. As centuries amassed, Dagoth Ur assumed position less of villain than of reckoning. He became case study in academies teaching metaphysics of ambition. When mind weds myth without public consent, empire of the self metastasizes. Plays reenacted his dialogues with Nerevarine, casting him sometimes as tyrant, sometimes as visionary, undone by absolute love for collective resonance. Treatises debated whether his unified dream presaged later imperial luminaries who sought centralized unity, or whether it served as cautionary naysay against any utopia minted from singular viewpoint. In truth, he became mirror. Each author saw what caution they most required. What then of the tribunal's ultimate fates? Legends contradict. One scroll asserts Vivek died shielding new refugees from cataclysmic storm, dissolving into moats that adhered to canal walls like luminous algae, gidding sailors thereafter. Another maintains he walked into oblivion at the invitation of Mephala to debate poetry with spider gods beyond time. Olmelixia, some say, perished by blade of remorse when her final power gambit turned upon her, leaving ghost lights flickering among high chapel ruins. Others claim she lives still, stripped of magic yet unaging, wandering under false names through ash markets, seeking absolution in anonymity. Sothasil's end appears equally protean, crushed by malfunctioning cogwork, or merged into transdimensional labyrinth of his own making, or alive, a bare-boned monk studying starlight from forgotten crater observatory. Uncertainty suits them. After lifetimes spent sculpting certainty, ambiguity becomes their enigmatic epitaph. One winter evening many cycles after Red Year, an aged chronicler named Ravith Othrin crossed the cooled plains around Red Mountain, armed only with wax tablets, stylus, and a lantern burning sultrous oil. he sought to compile the final volume in his series, Echoes of Quiet Mornings, interviewing those who remembered both tyranny of dream and promise of triad. He visited Kwama miners, now grandfathers, Telvanni mages turned pacifist horticulturists, Argonian fishermen who steered floats above drowned avenues of Vivek's ruins. Each recounted small stories, a thunderhead glimpsed without fear, a child namming mushroom pet after forgotten god, a corpus scar accepted as emblem rather than stigma. When Ravith at last arrived at the crater rim, he found the mountain tranquil, wreathed in frost rather than ash. Stars spilled overhead. Under those distant fires, he pressed stylus to wax and wrote a single sentence. The wound has clothed itself in seasons, but the scar remembers purpose. He left the tablet on a basalt altar, then descended into darkness, trusting starlight to keep vigil. And the mountain endured. Occasionally, explorers claimed they saw faint veins of red light threading low tunnels, only to fade when approached. Seismographs sometimes registered pulses not linked to tectonics, signatures eerily periodic, as though echo of forgotten engines still ticked, but such reports remained inconclusive. They served merely as reminders that black glass underfoot once reflected a dream so intense it tried to rewrite the world. The dream failed, yet its imprint shaped the path forward, not as dictation, but as boundary marker. Beyond that marker sprawled territory of collaborative dreaming, messier, slower, yet richer precisely because its chords required many hands to tune. Thus did Morrowind pass from age of isolated legend into era of shared experiment. It retained its fires, its obsidian cliffs, its salt wines whispering through Scathicraw fields, but the timbre of those whispers altered, shedding the relentless drone of heartbeats never requested. On quiet nights, elders around campfires taught children to place ear upon ground, not to fear what thrums below, but to listen, measure, and decide whether to dance or to rest. Some nights the ground remained still, and children laughed, inventing their own rhythms with drums of hollowed corkbulb wood. Other nights faint tremors rumbled, and they tapped feet in gentle counterpoint, acknowledging the earth but not surrendering to it. In that dialogue between tremor and footfall lived the lesson Dagoth Ur never learned, that harmony negotiated beats tyranny, both grand and benevolent. And so the chronicle returns to silence, not the silence of oppression or grief, but the fertile quiet of a new morning yet unlabeled. Red Mountain stands sentinel, not tyrant, not deity, but landscape awaiting next chorus. Whether future hearts will once more attempt to command its music, no quill can predict. But should such ambition arise, there remain atlases, triads, sculptures, and scars to counsel caution. Above all, there remains the simple discipline of breath: inhale limit, exhale potential, linger in consequence, cultivated by a civilization once forced to learn that even gods must bow before the will of honest silence. In this way, the saga of Dagoth Ur, the heart of a god, the gilded tribunal, the Blight, the Nerevarine, and the countless lives moved by their collision settles into gentle repose. The tale, having traveled from mythic dawn through furnace of apotheosis to tender dawn again, folds upon itself like cooled glass, holding glimmers of former fire inside translucent calm. Whoever lifts the tale in centuries to come will find within its layers a paradox, that the fiercest flames forge the most delicate stillness, that the grandest dreams may crumble, yet their ashes nourish seeds of humbler hope. And if the listener leans close, perhaps they will hear the faintest echo, neither warning nor promise, simply recognition that every heart beating in quiet freedom is itself a small mountain, capable of thunder, responsible for choosing whether to keep dream tethered to consent. Thus ends the chronicle, not with the closure of walls, but with the opening of doors, a threshold across which every step becomes chapter of its own making, written in footprints on ever-shifting ash, illuminated by the gentle glow of possibilities unbound.